A mail-order bride arrives at her new home in 1883 Texas, only to find it burned to ashes. No husband waiting, no roof, just ruins and a scarred stranger who tells her to leave. But Evelyn Hart didn't travel 1,000 miles to turn back now. She came with a trunk full of secrets, enough money to rebuild 10 homesteads, and a lie that could destroy everything. What happens when pride collides with hidden wealth? When love grows in the shadow of shame? Stay until the end to find out how two broken people build something neither could create alone. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, leaving Evelyn Hart standing alone on the edge of nowhere. The driver hadn't even waited for her to steady herself before snapping the reins, as if this god-forsaken stretch of Texas dirt might somehow curse him if he lingered too long. She watched the coach shrink into the horizon, swallowed by heat shimmer and distance, until there was nothing left but silence, the kind that pressed against your eardrums and made you aware of your own heartbeat. Evelyn turned toward what was supposed to be her future. Her breath caught, where a homestead should have stood, where Caleb Rourke's careful letters had described a modest cabin with a wraparound porch and a kitchen garden already planted. There was nothing but devastation. 3 walls stood like broken teeth against the sky, blackened timber frames jutting at odd angles. The 4th wall had collapsed entirely, leaving a scatter of charred boards across scorched earth. A stone chimney rose from the wreckage like a tombstone, its mortar cracked and smoke-stained, marking the grave of something that had once been whole. The barn still stood, some 50 yards distant, weathered but intact, its door hanging crooked on iron hinges. Beyond it, fencing stretched toward empty pasture land, and further still, a windmill turned lazy circles against the pale sky, its metal blades singing a lonesome creak and groan song that seemed to be the only living thing for miles. Evelyn's hands tightened on the handle of her leather trunk. 26 years old, dressed in a modest gray traveling dress that had already collected its share of dust, she looked like 100 other women who'd come west seeking something better. But the weight in that trunk, both literal and figurative, would have surprised anyone who took her for just another desperate soul fleeing a hard life back east. She was desperate in her own way, just not for the reasons people assumed. A movement caught her eye. On one of the fallen beams that had once supported the roof, a man sat with his back to her, shoulders hunched, staring out at nothing. He didn't turn at the sound of the departing coach, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. He simply sat there, still as stone, as if he'd been carved from the same charred wood that surrounded him. "Mr. Rourke?" Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. The man's shoulders stiffened. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, so slowly it seemed to cost him something, he turned his head. Evelyn had seen hard men before. Philadelphia had plenty of them. Dock workers with scarred knuckles, factory foremen with faces etched by years of smoke and sweat, war veterans who carried their battles in their eyes. But Caleb Rourke was something different. The left side of his face bore the puckered, shiny scars of old burns, stretching from his temple down to his jaw in patterns that looked like melted wax. His right hand, which he'd been resting on his knee, showed similar damage, the skin tight and discolored, the fingers slightly curled. He was tall. That much was clear even sitting down. Lean in the way of men who worked themselves to exhaustion and forgot to eat. His hair was dark brown, shot through with premature gray at the temples, and badly in need of cutting. His eyes, though, those were what held her. Dark blue, sharp as broken glass, and filled with something that looked like barely controlled fury. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was rough, like gravel scraped over iron, not unkind exactly, but blunt as a hammer. Evelyn set her trunk down in the dust. "I received your letter 4 months ago. You asked for a wife willing to work hard and build a life in Texas. I answered. The arrangements were made. That letter was written before, he gestured sharply at the ruins. Before all this." "When did it happen?" 6 weeks ago." He stood up, and she'd been right. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from years of manual labor. Lightning strike, dry season. The whole thing went up in less than an hour. He wiped his damaged hand on his trousers, a gesture that seemed unconscious. I wrote to tell you not to come. Must not have reached you in time. Or perhaps I'd already left Philadelphia. Evelyn studied the ruins with a practiced eye, cataloging what remained, what could be salvaged, what would need to be rebuilt from scratch. Is there water? He blinked, thrown by the question. What? Water. A well. A creek. Something. Well's intact. 40 yards past the barn. He frowned at her, suspicion creeping into his expression. Miss Hart, Mrs. Rourke, according to the proxy marriage certificate. She pulled the document from her traveling bag, unfolding it carefully. Signed and witnessed in Philadelphia, as per your instructions. Legally binding in the state of Texas. Caleb's jaw worked, muscles tensing beneath the scarred skin. That was before you saw... He stopped, seemed to force himself to continue. Before you knew what you were getting into. The agreement was for a working homestead. A life being built. Not this. I can see what this is. Evelyn folded the certificate and tucked it back into her bag. I can also see a barn that's still standing, a well that works, and enough land to support livestock and crops. The house can be rebuilt. With what money? The words came out sharp, almost angry. I sank everything I had into that cabin. The timber, the windows, the stove, all of it gone. I've got maybe $70 left to my name, and most of that's got to go toward winter supplies. He took a step toward her, and she saw the pride and shame warring in his expression. I can't give you what was promised. I can't give you anything except hard work and a barn to sleep in until I can scrape together enough to send me back? To give you a choice. He looked away, that damaged hand curling into a fist. Real choice. Not just showing up to ruins and a man who can't provide. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle between them. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of scorched wood and sun-baked earth. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, its call thin and lonely. Then she bent down and unlatched her trunk. What are you doing? Caleb asked. Evelyn didn't answer. She opened the heavy lid and began lifting out items with deliberate care. First came a set of carpenter's tools, a hammer, a saw, a level, all well used but maintained, then packets of seeds wrapped in oilcloth. A leather satchel that clinked with the sound of glass bottles, medicine, tinctures, bandages, a cast-iron skillet and a Dutch oven, a folded canvas tarp, a coil of good rope, work gloves, nails in a wooden box. Caleb stared. Those aren't the belongings of a seamstress. I never said I was only a seamstress. Evelyn straightened up, meeting his eyes directly. My father was a carpenter before he died. He taught me his trade. My mother ran a boarding house and took in mending to make ends meet. She taught me hers. She gestured at the items laid out in the dust. I came prepared to work, Mr. Rourke. The letter you wrote didn't promise me comfort. It promised me partnership, purpose, a chance to build something real. You can't possibly want... What I want, Evelyn interrupted, her voice firm, is to not go back to Philadelphia. What I want is to not spend another year sewing wedding dresses for women whose husbands chose them for their dowries. What I want is to stand on ground I helped build and know that I earned my place there. She picked up the hammer, testing its weight in her hand. You're right that you can't give me what was promised in that letter, but neither can I give you what you probably expected. So, we're even. Caleb shook his head slowly. You don't understand what you're saying. The work ahead? It's brutal. Clearing the burned timber, laying new foundation, framing walls, cutting and hauling every board. It'll take months, maybe a year, and that's if nothing else goes wrong. And things always go wrong out here. He held up his scarred hand. I got this in a barn fire 5 years ago, saving horses that weren't even mine. The cabin fire? That was just Texas reminding me that nothing you build is ever really yours. It can all burn tomorrow. Then we build it today. Evelyn closed her trunk and sat down on it, looking up at him calmly. I've spent the last 10 years watching everything I cared about disappear piece by piece. My father died when I was 16. My mother followed 3 years later. The boarding house went to debts. I've been living in a single room above a tailor's shop, sewing until my fingers bled, saving every penny and waiting for... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Waiting for a reason to start over somewhere no one knew me. Your letter gave me that reason. You're running from something. It wasn't a question. Isn't everyone who comes west? She met his gaze steadily. The question is whether you're running toward something too. Caleb was silent for a long moment. The wind tugged at his shirt, pressing the fabric against his lean frame. His eyes moved from Evelyn to the ruins to the barn and back again, as if he were calculating some equation that didn't quite balance. The barn's got room for two, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Separate spaces. There's a tack room with a door that closes. You can have that. I'll sleep in the loft. That's acceptable. There's no furniture except what I salvaged, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame I managed to pull out before the roof came down. Mattress burned. I can sew a new one. We'll need hay or straw for stuffing. He almost smiled at that. Almost. You plan everything, don't you? Someone has to. Evelyn stood up, brushing dust from her skirts. When's the last time you ate a real meal? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Yesterday. Beans, some jerky. Jerky's not a meal, it's survival. She looked toward the barn. Is there a fire pit, somewhere I can cook? Outside the barn. I've been using it for... He stopped himself. Yeah, there's a fire pit. Good. Then here's what we're going to do today. You're going to show me where everything is, the well, the pasture, the property boundaries. I'm going to make a proper meal while you do that, and then we're going to sit down and figure out what needs to happen first. She picked up her trunk, struggling slightly with the weight, and Caleb instinctively stepped forward to help. Their hands brushed on the handle, and he jerked back as if burned. I can carry my own trunk, Evelyn said quietly. I wasn't suggesting you couldn't. His voice was stiff. Just trying to help. I know. She softened her tone slightly. But we're going to be doing a lot of things ourselves, Mr. Rourke. We might as well get used to it. He watched her carry the trunk toward the barn, her back straight despite the obvious weight. She didn't look back to see if he was following. Didn't ask for permission or approval. Just moved forward with the kind of quiet determination that came from years of doing what needed to be done, whether anyone noticed or not. Caleb stood in the ruins for a moment longer, surrounded by the charred skeleton of everything he'd built over the past 3 years. The cabin had been his proof that he could make something of himself despite the scars, despite the whispers in town, despite the way people looked at him like he was something broken that might cut them if they got too close. And now it was gone. But this woman, this stubborn, practical woman who'd opened a trunk full of tools instead of crying at the sight of devastation, she wasn't looking at him like he was broken. She was looking at him like he was someone who could still build. He didn't know if that was better or worse. Slowly, Caleb followed Evelyn toward the barn, his shadow stretching long across the scorched earth behind him. The barn smelled of hay and leather and the ghostly scent of horses long since sold. Evelyn stepped inside, letting her eyes adjust to the dimmer light. The structure was simple but solid, thick posts supporting a hayloft above, stalls lining one side, and a tack room built into the back corner with actual walls and a door. The floor was packed earth, swept clean, and the whole space had the feeling of something carefully maintained. You built this yourself? She asked. Caleb nodded, leaning against the doorframe. First thing I did when I claimed the land. Figured I could live rough for a while, but the animals needed shelter. Bought 2 horses and some chickens. He paused. Had to sell the horses after the fire to buy lumber. Chickens wandered off or got taken by coyotes. Evelyn walked the length of the barn, examining the joinery, the way the beams fit together, the care taken in every detail. This is good work, better than good. Learned from my uncle in Missouri. He was a builder before the war. Caleb's voice held a note of something that might have been pride, though he tried to bury it. Said I had a feel for it, for making things that lasted. He was right. Evelyn set her trunk down in the tack room. It was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, but it had a window, a hook for a lantern, and wooden pegs on the wall for hanging things. Someone had swept it recently. This will do nicely. Caleb cleared his throat. There's a chamber pot in the corner. I'll empty it every morning before you wake, for Other needs, there's an outhouse about 30 yards south. I keep it clean. The formality in his voice, the careful way he avoided looking directly at her, Evelyn recognized it. This was a man who taught himself to keep distance, to not impose, to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible despite his size. The scars had done that to him, she suspected. People had taught him that he was something to be tolerated at best, avoided at worst. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll need to unpack, but first, let's address the immediate concerns: food, water, basic supplies." She turned to face him. "How much flour do you have?" "Maybe 20 pounds. Salt, sugar, coffee?" "Salt's running low. No sugar. Coffee's long gone." "Lard, bacon, any preserved meat besides jerky?" He shook his head. "I've been keeping it simple. Wasn't worth cooking for just me." Evelyn made a mental list, already calculating what she could make with limited supplies versus what they'd need to acquire. "All right, here's what we'll do today. You show me where the well is and how to work the pump. Then I want to see the property, all of it, boundaries, structures, anything that's usable. While we do that, you can tell me about the neighbors, the nearest town, and how people conduct business around here." She paused. "And tonight, we'll have a real meal. Even if it's just beans and cornbread, we'll sit down at a table and eat it properly." "Why?" The question came out rougher than he probably intended. "Because we're not animals, Mr. Rourke, and we're not strangers passing in the night. We're—" She hesitated, then pressed forward. "We're married according to the law, partners according to your letter. That means we break bread together. That means we talk about the work ahead. That means we figure out how to live in the same space without—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Without hating each other?" Caleb offered, and there was something almost like humor in his voice. "That would be preferable, yes." This time he did smile, brief and small, barely a quirk at the corner of his mouth, but real. "All right, Mrs. Rourke, let's go see what you've gotten yourself into." They walked the property as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Caleb showed her the well first, a solid stone structure with a good pump that brought up clear, cold water from deep underground. Evelyn tested it herself, working the handle until water gushed into the wooden bucket, then tasted it carefully. "Sweet," she noted. "No mineral taste. That's good. Drilled it myself the first summer, 40 feet down before I hit the aquifer." There was quiet pride in his voice again, the kind he didn't seem to know he was revealing. "Best decision I made. Some of the neighbors haul water from the creek 2 miles south. They lose livestock every summer when it runs dry." They walked the fence line next, nearly 100 acres, Caleb explained, though only about 20 were cleared and usable for crops or grazing. The rest was scrubland, good for nothing but collecting rattlesnakes and providing sparse forage for wild animals. He'd cleared the 20 acres himself over 3 years, pulling stumps and rocks until his hands bled, building the fence post by post. "You did all this alone?" Evelyn asked, looking at the neat rows of posts stretching into the distance. "Mostly. Had some help from the Hendersons, neighbors to the west. They came out for a barn raising when I got the frame up, and I've returned the favor when they needed an extra hand." He kicked at a loose stone. "Good people. They came by after the fire with food and offers to help rebuild. I told them I didn't need charity." "That was foolish." He looked at her sharply. "I don't take handouts." "It's not a handout if you give back," Evelyn said calmly. "That's how communities work. They help you, you help them. It's trade, not charity. It's pity when they look at you the way they look at me. Or maybe it's just decency." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Mr. Rourke, I'm going to be direct with you because we don't have time for dancing around things. You're going to have to let people help us, because I can't rebuild that house alone, and neither can you. Not in any reasonable time frame. We'll need lumber, labor, and skills we don't have. And yes, people might look at you with concern or curiosity or whatever else you think you see in their eyes, but that's their problem, not yours. Your problem is making sure we have a roof before winter." Caleb stared at her, his jaw working. For a moment, she thought he might argue, might let that simmering anger she'd seen in the ruins boil over. But instead, he exhaled slowly and nodded. "You always this direct? I find it saves time. Must make you popular at parties." "I wouldn't know. I don't get invited to parties. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, and started walking again. Caleb caught up with a few long strides. The Hendersons, Tom and Mary, they live about 3 miles west. They've got 4 kids, all under 12. Tom farms mostly, some cattle. Mary's the one who brought soup after the fire. He paused. I was not gracious about it. You'll apologize when we see them next. Yes, ma'am. Evelyn hid a small smile at the automatic deference in his response. They continued walking, and Caleb pointed out other landmarks, the old buffalo trail that ran along the northern property line, the dry creek bed that flooded every spring, the stand of cottonwood trees where he'd planned to expand the orchard. He talked more easily as they walked, his voice losing some of its defensive edge, and Evelyn listened carefully, filing away information. Town's 8 miles southeast, he said as they circled back toward the barn. Place called Redemption. About 200 people, maybe less. Got a general store, a blacksmith, a doctor who's drunk more often than not, and a church that doubles as a school. Saturday's market day if you need to buy or trade supplies. What do people trade for? Eggs, milk, vegetables if you've got a garden going, sewing and mending if you're good at it, firewood in winter, labor when someone needs help with harvest or building. He glanced at her. You said you're a seamstress? Among other things. There's probably work in town if you wanted it. Ladies are always needing dresses fixed or altered. Mrs. Patterson runs the general store. She might know who's looking. Evelyn filed that information away as well. Income would matter, especially if they were going to rebuild properly, but she wasn't ready to discuss money yet. Not when she didn't know how Caleb would react to the truth sitting in the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath a false bottom. They reached the barn as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Evelyn immediately set to work building up the fire pit while Caleb hauled water from the well. She had flour, salt, and a small amount of lard from her trunk, emergency supplies she'd packed for the journey. Combined with Caleb's beans and some wild onions he'd gathered earlier in the week, she managed to create something that resembled a proper meal. They ate at the salvage table, set up outside the barn under the darkening sky. The cornbread was dense but edible, the beans seasoned with onion and salt. It wasn't much, but it was hot and filling, and they ate in silence for several minutes before Caleb spoke. You're a good cook. I'm an adequate cook with poor ingredients, Evelyn corrected. Give me a proper kitchen and real supplies, and I'll show you what I can do. We'll get there. He said it quietly, like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Evelyn set down her spoon and looked at him across the table. In the fading light, the scars on his face were less visible, smoothed by shadows. He looked younger than she'd first thought, maybe 32 or 33, though hard living had added years to his features. We need to talk about the rebuilding, she said. I know. And we need to be honest about resources. Time, money, labor, all of it. Caleb's shoulders tensed, but he nodded. I've got $73 in actual currency. Another 20 or so in credit at the general store, though I've been trying not to use it. I can do most of the carpentry work myself, but we'll need to buy lumber, nails, windows, roofing materials. Even buying cheap, we're looking at $200 minimum, and that's for a basic structure. What about the neighbors? You said they offered to help. Tom Henderson's good with stonework. He could help with a new foundation or a fireplace. Mary's brother runs the sawmill in town. Might give us a discount on lumber. He paused. But I can't ask them to work for free. It's not right. Then we offer trade. You help with their next building project. I'll sow for the family. We'll share vegetables from the garden once it's producing. Evelyn ticked off options on her fingers. That's not charity. That's community. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. She stood up and began clearing the dishes. Tomorrow, we start clearing the burned timber from the cabin site. Whatever's usable, we save. The rest gets cut for firewood. While we do that, we make a list of everything we need and start figuring out who to approach for what. She paused. And you write a letter to the Hendersons, a proper one, thanking them for their kindness and asking if they'd be willing to help with the rebuild in exchange for labor trade. Caleb pushed back from the table, his expression unreadable. You're used to giving orders. I'm used to getting things done. Evelyn met his eyes steadily. If that bothers you, say so now. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her in the near darkness. Then, surprisingly, he shook his head. No, it doesn't bother me. It's just different. The women I've known were either trying to fix me or trying to avoid me. You're doing neither. I'm trying to build a house, Evelyn said simply. Everything else is secondary. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a crack in the defensive walls he'd built around himself. All right, Mrs. Rourke, we'll do it your way. But when your back is screaming and your hands are bleeding and you're wondering what the hell you got yourself into, remember, I gave you a chance to leave. And I'll remind you that I chose to stay. She carried the dishes toward the well to rinse them. Get some rest, Mr. Rourke. Tomorrow, we start building our life. That night, Evelyn lay on the bare floor of the tack room, wrapped in the blankets she'd brought from Philadelphia, and listened to the sounds of the barn settling around her. Above, in the loft, she could hear Caleb moving around, the creak of boards under his weight, the rustle of hay as he made his bed. She thought about the money hidden in her trunk. $43,000, give or take, the inheritance from her mother's side of the family, passed down through a maiden aunt who'd never married and never trusted banks. It had been sewn into the lining of quilts and hidden in the walls of the boarding house, discovered only after her mother's death when Evelyn had been forced to sell the property. Enough money to rebuild this homestead 10 times over. Enough to buy a house in town, live comfortably, never work another day in her life if she chose. And she'd lied about all of it. Not directly. She'd never claimed to be poor. But she'd let Caleb assume, let him believe she was just another working-class woman seeking a better life out west. The truth was far more complicated. She'd fled Philadelphia because men had started circling like sharks once word of her inheritance got out. Marriage proposals from strangers, business propositions that were barely disguised attempts at theft, even a distant cousin who'd shown up claiming some legal right to the money. She'd wanted to disappear, to find someplace where she could be valued for her work, her skills, her partnership, not her bank account. But now, lying in the dark and listening to Caleb's quiet movements above, she felt the weight of the lie pressing down on her chest like a stone. He was talking about scraping together $70. She had enough money to solve every problem they faced, and she couldn't tell him, not yet, maybe not ever, because she'd seen the pride in his voice when he talked about the well he'd drilled, the barn he'd built, the land he'd cleared. She'd seen the shame in his eyes when he looked at the burned cabin. If he knew about the money, it would change everything. He'd see himself as her hired hand instead of her partner. Or worse, he'd see the money as a solution to problems that actually required his skills, his strength, his knowledge of this land. No. She'd made the right choice in hiding it. They would rebuild together, using what resources they had, building something real through sweat and partnership. And when the time was right, if the time was ever right, she'd find a way to tell him the truth. If he didn't discover it first. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and closed her eyes, trying not to think about all the ways this fragile new beginning could shatter as completely as the burned cabin outside. Above her, Caleb finally settled into silence, and the barn grew quiet, except for the wind whispering through the cracks in the walls, a sound that could have been loneliness or possibility, depending on how you chose to hear it. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky the color of dirty cotton. Evelyn woke to the sound of Caleb already moving around outside, the rhythmic thunk of an axe biting into wood, the scrape of charred timber being dragged across dirt. She dressed quickly in the dim light of the tack room, pulling on the oldest dress she'd brought, one already patched at the elbows and hem. Over it, she tied a canvas apron she'd sewn herself, with deep pockets for nails and tools. When she stepped outside, Caleb was stripped down to his undershirt despite the morning chill, sweat already darkening the fabric between his shoulder blades. He'd started at the cabin ruins, pulling apart the collapsed wall beam by beam, sorting the wood into piles, salvageable, firewood, complete loss. His scarred hands were wrapped in strips of cloth, makeshift gloves that were already coming loose. "You should have woken me," Evelyn said. Caleb didn't look up from his work. "Figured you'd earned a full night's sleep after the journey. Besides, this part's just clearing. Doesn't need 2 people yet." "Everything needs 2 people if you want it done right." She picked up a pair of work gloves from her trunk and pulled them on, then grabbed the other end of the beam he was wrestling with. "On 3. 1, 2. They heaved together, and the beam came free with a groan of protest, sending up a cloud of ash and splinters. They carried it to the salvage pile, and Evelyn examined it closely in the growing light. The outer layer was charred black, but the inner wood still looked solid, oak, if she wasn't mistaken, and thick as a man's thigh. "This can be planed down," she said, running her gloved hand along the surface. "Lose maybe 2 inches to the burn, but the core's still good. We could use it for support beams in the new structure." Caleb stared at her. "You know timber?" "I told you, my father was a carpenter. I spent my childhood in his workshop." She moved to the next beam, assessing it with the same critical eye. "This one's too far gone. See how it's cracked all the way through? But that cross brace there, that's worth saving." They worked in silence for the next hour, falling into a rhythm that required no words. Caleb would leverage a piece loose, and Evelyn would help carry it to the appropriate pile. When they found something questionable, she'd make the call, save it or burn it. He never argued with her assessments, which surprised her. Most men she'd known would have bristled at a woman making decisions about carpentry. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, and the work grew harder. Some of the beams were pinned under tons of rubble, stone from the collapsed chimney, the iron stove that had crashed through the floor, twisted remnants of the roof. They had to dig and pry and heave, their breathing loud in the stillness, muscles screaming with effort. Around mid-morning, Caleb straightened up and wiped his forehead with his arm, leaving a streak of soot across his brow. "We need to talk about the immediate plan." Evelyn set down the board she'd been carrying and nodded. Her back already ached, and her hands were sore despite the gloves. "I'm listening." "The way I see it, we've got 2 choices. We can try to rebuild exactly where the cabin stood, or we can choose a new site." He gestured toward a spot about 40 yards south, where the ground sloped gently upward. "Higher elevation there, better drainage. Wouldn't flood in spring like this spot does." But moving the site means starting from scratch. New foundation, new well access. "Well's already here, and it's good. We just need to extend the path." Caleb's eyes were sharp, calculating. "But yeah, new foundation, new everything. It'd add time to the build." Evelyn studied both locations, thinking like her father had taught her, not just about today, but about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. The higher ground makes more sense long term. Flooding's not just an inconvenience, it's a structural threat. And if we're building new anyway, she trailed off, an idea forming. "What?" "If we're starting fresh, we could build smarter. Not just a cabin, but something that could grow with us. Root cellar dug in from the start. Maybe plan for an addition later, when we have resources." She caught herself, realizing she was thinking aloud about a future she wasn't sure they'd share. "I mean, if that's something you'd want." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You plan on staying, then, long enough to need additions?" "I plan on staying as long as there's work to be done in a partnership worth maintaining," Evelyn said carefully. "I didn't come all this way to turn around at the first bit of hardship." "This isn't the first bit. This is the middle of hardship, heading straight toward more hardship." "Then I suppose I'm in the right place." She met his gaze steadily. "Are we building on the high ground or not?" A slow smile crossed Caleb's scarred face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Yeah, we're building on the high ground." They spent the rest of the morning clearing debris and hauling salvageable materials to a protected spot near the barn. By noon, Evelyn's shoulders burned and her palms stung despite the gloves. When Caleb finally called for a break, she had to force herself not to collapse on the spot. He brought water from the well in a dented tin cup, and they passed it back and forth, drinking deeply. The water was cold and clean, tasting faintly of minerals and stone. "You work harder than most men I know," Caleb said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. "Most men you know didn't grow up hauling furniture for a boarding house." Evelyn flexed her sore fingers. "My mother used to say idle hands were the devil's playthings. She kept mine busy from dawn to dark. Sounds like a hard woman." "She was practical. There's a difference." Evelyn took another drink and handed the cup back. "What about your family? You mentioned an uncle in Missouri." Caleb's expression shuddered slightly. "Dead. Killed at Wilson's Creek in '61. My father died of fever the winter after. Mother followed a year later. I was 16. He stared into the cup. I worked other people's land for 12 years before I saved enough to claim my own out here. 3 years building it up, and then he gestured at the ruins. And then you wrote a letter asking for a wife. And then I wrote a letter asking for a partner, he corrected. I was clear about that in the advertisement. Seeking a woman willing to work, not a woman seeking to be kept. I didn't want... He stopped himself. Didn't want what? Didn't want someone who'd look at me and see a charity case, or worse, a monster to be pitied. His jaw tightened. The scars tend to bring out one or the other in people. Evelyn considered this, choosing her words with care. I see a man who pulled a burning beam off a bed frame to save it, who built a barn solid enough to last decades, who drilled a well 40 feet deep with his own hands. She paused. The scars are just part of the landscape, like everything else out here, present, but not the whole story. Caleb looked at her with something like wonder. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. It wastes everyone's time. He laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound that seemed to startle him as much as her. You're a strange woman, Mrs. Rourke. And you're a stubborn man, Mr. Rourke. I suppose that makes us well matched. She stood up, her muscles protesting. Come on, we've got hours of daylight left, and those beams won't clear themselves. They worked through the afternoon, and by sunset they'd cleared enough space to see the full outline of where the old cabin had stood. The stone chimney still rose from the wreckage, and Caleb walked around it slowly, examining the mortar with a critical eye. Stone's still good, he said. If we're careful, we could salvage most of it for the new fireplace. Save us the cost of quarrying new. How long would it take to dismantle? A week, maybe less if we're systematic about it. He ran his hand over the smoke-blackened stones. My uncle taught me masonry, too. Said a man who could work stone and wood could always find employment. Smart uncle. He was. Caleb's voice went soft. Used to tell me that buildings were the only honest thing a man could make. You can lie with words, he'd say, but you can't lie with a wall. It either stands or it doesn't. Evelyn felt a pang of guilt at those words, thinking about the money hidden in her trunk. But she pushed it down, focusing instead on the work ahead. Then we'll build walls that stand. That evening, Evelyn cooked a better meal. She'd found wild greens growing near the creek bed, and combined with the last of the beans and some flour, she managed to create something that resembled a proper stew. They ate outside again, the sky turning pink and orange above them. Tomorrow, Caleb said, sopping up the last of the stew with a piece of cornbread, we should ride into town. Let folks know you've arrived and start getting a sense of what supplies are available. Saturday's market day, but the general store's open most days. I thought you said town was 8 miles. It is. But I've got one horse left. Sold the others after the fire, but kept Smoke. He's old but steady. Can carry us both if we don't push him hard. Evelyn felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of meeting the town, of being introduced as Caleb's wife, of navigating the social dynamics of a place where everyone would know their business. What should I expect? Curiosity, mostly. Questions. Some of the women will want to inspect you, see what kind of fool would marry a scarred-up homesteader sight unseen. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the general store, she's all right, nosy, but decent. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Collins, she'll probably invite you to quilting circles and church socials. You can say yes or no as you please. What about the doctor you mentioned? Doc Brennan. Like I said, he drinks, but he knows his trade. Probably the best surgeon between here and San Antonio when he's sober. Caleb set his empty bowl down. Why? Just curious about the town's resources. What's available, what's not. She didn't mention that she'd brought medical supplies of her own, or that her mother had taught her basic nursing, how to set bones, dress wounds, recognize the signs of infection. Some information was worth holding back until it was needed. They cleaned up together, falling into an easy routine, Caleb washing the dishes in a basin of water while Evelyn dried them with a cloth. It was domestic and strange, this partnership forming between two people who barely knew each other. Yet there was a comfort in it, too, in the simple rhythm of shared work. That night, before retreating to the tack room, Evelyn pulled out paper and a pencil from her trunk and began making lists by lamplight. Materials needed, tasks to complete, resources to acquire. She organized her thoughts the way her father had taught her. Break the impossible into manageable pieces, then tackle each piece systematically. The money sat heavy in her mind. With it, she could buy everything on her list tomorrow. Lumber, nails, windows, proper tools, hired help. They could have a house built in a month instead of 6 months or a year. But Caleb's words echoed in her head. I don't take handouts. And worse, his uncle's philosophy. You can't lie with a wall. It either stands or it doesn't. She was lying, not with walls, but with silence. And every day she didn't tell him about the money. The lie grew bigger, more structural, more foundational to everything they were building together. Evelyn set down her pencil and pressed her palms against her eyes, feeling the weight of the secret like a physical thing in her chest. Tomorrow they'd go to town. She'd meet the neighbors, start building the social connections they'd need to survive out here. And she'd keep her mouth shut about the $43,000 that could solve every problem they faced. Because the truth was, she didn't know how to solve the problem of Caleb's pride. And until she figured that out, the money would stay hidden. In the loft above, she heard Caleb moving around, settling in for the night. The boards creaked under his weight, and she found herself wondering what he was thinking, if he suspected anything. If he ever questioned why a seamstress from Philadelphia had come prepared with carpenter's tools and medical supplies and seeds for planting. If he wondered what else she might be hiding. The lamp flickered and Evelyn blew it out, plunging the tack room into darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight she needed rest. But sleep came slowly, and when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of walls that wouldn't stand and foundations built on secrets that crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. The ride into town the next morning was an education in survival. Smoke was indeed old, a gray gelding with patient eyes and a shuffling gait that suggested he'd seen better days. Caleb sat in the saddle and Evelyn rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the way his muscles shifted as he guided the horse along the rutted trail. They didn't talk much during the journey. The landscape demanded attention. Rolling grassland broken by stands of mesquite and oak, dry creek beds that would run wild during spring floods, distant mesas that shimmered in the heat. Hawks circled overhead, and once they spotted a small herd of pronghorn antelope in the distance, moving like liquid across the plain. Redemption appeared as a cluster of buildings on the horizon, growing larger as they approached. It was smaller than Evelyn had imagined, maybe 20 structures total, most of them wood frame with false fronts to make them look bigger than they were. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with hitching posts and water troughs. A few people moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces turning to watch as Caleb and Evelyn rode past. Caleb guided Smoke to the general store and dismounted, then offered his hand to help Evelyn down. She took it, feeling the rough texture of his scarred palm through her glove, and stepped carefully to the ground. Several people on the sidewalk stared openly, at Caleb's scars, at Evelyn, at the two of them together. She met their gazes calmly, refusing to look away or seem ashamed. The general store was a jumble of goods, barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, tools hanging from the ceiling, jars of preserves lining rough-hewn shelves. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, round-faced and sharp-eyed, wearing a calico dress and a white apron. Caleb Rourke, she said, her voice carrying across the store. Heard you were still out at that burned-up homestead. Also heard you might have sent for a wife, though I told Martha Henderson that was probably just gossip. It wasn't gossip, Mrs. Patterson. Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. This is Evelyn Hart. Evelyn Rourke now. My wife. Evelyn, this is Constance Patterson. She runs the store with her husband, Harold. Mrs. Patterson's eyes went wide, then narrowed as she studied Evelyn from head to toe. Well, you're real, I'll give you that. Though what possessed a young woman to marry into a burned-out homestead is beyond my comprehension. I came for the partnership, not the house, Evelyn said evenly. Houses can be rebuilt. Can they now? And with what money, if you don't mind my asking? Because Caleb here's been running on credit for the past month, and Harold's getting nervous about extending more. Caleb's shoulders tensed and Evelyn saw shame flash across his face. She stepped forward slightly, putting herself between him and Mrs. Patterson's sharp gaze. "We'll be paying down the account as soon as we're able," Evelyn said. "In the meantime, we're not here to ask for more credit. We're here to see what work might be available in town. I'm a skilled seamstress, and I understand there might be need for that kind of service." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "You any good?" "I made this dress." Evelyn gestured at her traveling outfit, which, despite days of wear, still showed quality construction. "I can do alterations, repairs, custom work, whatever's needed." Mrs. Patterson came around the counter, examining the dress more closely. She pinched the fabric between her fingers, studied the seams, tested a button. "Not bad. Not bad at all. Martha Henderson's daughter is getting married in 2 months. They've been looking for someone to make the wedding dress. And Mrs. Collins, the preacher's wife, she's always needing help with her sewing projects." She straightened up. "I could put the word out, if you're serious about working." "I'm serious." "And you'd charge fair prices? Not try to gouge folks just because you're new in town?" "I'd charge what the work is worth. No more, no less." Mrs. Patterson studied her for another long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll spread the word. Come back Saturday for market day, and I'll introduce you around." She glanced at Caleb. "How's the rebuilding coming?" "Slow." Caleb's voice was tight. "But we're making progress. Tom Henderson stopped by yesterday. Said he'd offered to help, and you turned him down." "I didn't turn him down. I just—" Caleb stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "I told him I wasn't ready for help yet. Still clearing the site." "Pride's a fool's luxury, Caleb Rourke." Mrs. Patterson crossed her arms. "You've got a wife now. That changes things. You can't afford to refuse help when it's freely offered." Evelyn saw Caleb's jaw clench, saw him struggling with the words. She intervened quietly. "We're planning to accept help, Mrs. Patterson. But we wanted to have a clear plan first. Know exactly what we need and what we can offer in return. We'll be calling on the Hendersons soon." "See that you do." Mrs. Patterson turned back to Evelyn. "You seem like you've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't let this stubborn fool's pride make your life harder than it needs to be." "I'll keep that in mind." They left the store a few minutes later with a small package of supplies. Thread, needles, a piece of fabric Mrs. Patterson had sold them at cost, and stepped back into the bright sunlight. Caleb was silent, his face set in hard lines, and Evelyn could feel the tension radiating off him. "She meant well," Evelyn said quietly as they walked toward where smoke was tied. "She meant to shame me in front of my wife." Caleb's voice was low and bitter. "Make sure you knew what kind of man you'd married, one who can't even pay his bills." "She meant to help, in her own blunt way, and she succeeded. I now have potential work lined up." Evelyn stopped walking and turned to face him. "Mr. Rourke, if we're going to survive this, you need to learn the difference between shame and practical reality. Yes, you have debt. Yes, you need help. Those are facts, not judgments on your character. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who—" He stopped himself, breathing hard. "Who what? Failed? Because that's not what I see. I see a man who built a homestead from nothing, lost it to an act of nature beyond his control, and is trying to rebuild despite having every reason to give up." She stepped closer. "That's not failure. That's resilience." Caleb stared at her, something raw and uncertain in his eyes. "You really believe that?" "I wouldn't say it otherwise." She softened her tone. "But Mrs. Patterson was right about one thing. You can't afford pride right now. Neither can I. We need this community, and they need to know we're willing to be part of it." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll visit the Hendersons this week. Make peace. Ask for help properly." "Good." They mounted Smoke and headed back toward the homestead, but Caleb guided the horse on a different route, veering west instead of straight home. After about 20 minutes, a farmhouse came into view, a solid structure with a good roof, smoke rising from the chimney, children playing in the yard. "The Hendersons," Caleb said quietly. "Figured we might as well not waste time." Evelyn felt a surge of approval. He'd listened. Actually listened and adjusted. That was more than many men would do. As they approached, a woman came out onto the porch, 30-something, with brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and a flour-dusted apron. Her face lit up when she saw them. "Caleb, and this must be your bride we heard about." She came down the steps, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Mary Henderson. Tom's inside with the older boys, working on a broken plow, but he'll want to meet you proper." Evelyn dismounted and accepted Mary's outstretched hand. "Evelyn Rourke, pleased to meet you. Come inside, both of you. I've got coffee on, and I just pulled bread from the oven." Mary's eyes were warm and genuinely welcoming, without the sharp assessment of Mrs. Patterson. "We've been hoping Caleb would bring you by." They followed Mary into a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. It was a lived-in space, children's drawings tacked to the walls, a well-used table scarred with years of family meals, windows that let in good light. A man rose from the table as they entered, tall, bearded, with the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. "Tom Henderson," he said, offering his hand to Evelyn. "Welcome to Redemption, Mrs. Rourke." "Thank you." Evelyn shook his hand firmly. "And thank you for your kindness to my husband after the fire. I understand you brought food and offered assistance." Tom glanced at Caleb, who looked uncomfortable. "It's what neighbors do, though I got the sense my help wasn't particularly wanted at the time." "It was wanted," Caleb said quietly. "I just didn't know how to accept it properly. I'm sorry for that." The words clearly cost him, and Tom's expression softened. No apologies needed. Losing a home like that, I can't imagine what that's like. A man's entitled to some rough edges while he figures out how to move forward. Mary poured coffee and sliced bread, and they all sat around the table. The conversation flowed more easily than Evelyn had expected. Mary asking about Philadelphia, Tom and Caleb discussing lumber sources and building techniques, the children periodically bursting in with questions or requests before being shooed back outside. "We're planning to start the rebuild next week," Caleb said eventually. "Decided to build on higher ground, south of where the original cabin stood. Better drainage, less risk of flooding." "Smart thinking," Tom said. "You'll need help with the foundation work, heavy lifting, stone placement. I could bring my boys. The older two are 14 and 12, strong enough to be useful." "I was hoping you'd say that." Caleb took a breath. "I can't pay in currency, but I can trade labor. When you need help with harvest or building projects of your own, I'll be there." "Fair enough." Tom extended his hand across the table, and Caleb shook it. "We'll start whenever you're ready." Mary turned to Evelyn. "And what about you? What skills did you bring from Philadelphia besides the good sense to marry this stubborn fool?" Evelyn smiled. "Sewing, mostly. My mother ran a boarding house, so I learned cooking and household management. My father was a carpenter before he died, so I know my way around tools and lumber." Mary's eyebrows rose. "A carpenter's daughter? Well, that explains why you're not fainting at the prospect of rebuilding a homestead from scratch." She refilled Evelyn's coffee cup. "My daughter Sarah's getting married in October. I've been worried sick about her wedding dress. I can manage basic sewing, but nothing fancy enough for a wedding. Would you be willing to take on the work?" "I'd be happy to." "When can I meet with Sarah to discuss what she wants?" "Saturday, at the market. I'll bring her by the general store." Mary beamed. "Oh, this is wonderful. Sarah's been so anxious about the dress, and now I can tell her we found someone skilled." They talked for another hour, making plans and sharing information. Tom knew a man at the sawmill who could give them a discount on lumber. Mary had connections with several families in town who might need sewing work. The Hendersons' youngest daughter had outgrown all her dresses and needed new ones made. It was trade and community in action, exactly what Evelyn had described to Caleb, not charity, but mutual support. As they prepared to leave, Mary pulled Evelyn aside. "I'm glad Caleb found you," she said quietly. "He's had a hard time of it, between the scars and people's cruel whispers. He needed someone who could see past all that to the good man underneath." "I see a partner," Evelyn said simply. "That's all I need to see." Mary squeezed her hand. "You're going to do just fine here." The ride back to the homestead was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before, comfortable, contemplative. When they finally arrived, the sun was setting, painting the ruins and the barn in shades of amber and gold. Caleb helped Evelyn down from the horse. his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For pushing me to do the right thing. For—" He struggled with the words. "For not making me feel small when I was acting like a stubborn ass." "We're partners, Mr. Rourke. Partners call each other on their nonsense." She smiled slightly. "Though I appreciate you calling yourself out this time. Saves me the effort." He laughed. That same surprise sound she'd heard before, as if laughter was something he'd forgotten how to do and was just relearning. "Come on, let's get some food in us before we both collapse." That night, as Evelyn lay in the tack room listening to the familiar sounds of the barn settling, she felt something shift inside her. They were building something here, not just a house, but a life. Connections with neighbors, plans for the future, a partnership that was starting to feel real instead of just legal. And the money in her trunk felt heavier than ever. Because now it wasn't just Caleb's pride at stake. It was the Henderson family's willingness to help, Mary's genuine friendship, the community's investment in their success. If the truth came out, that Evelyn could have bought all the lumber and hired all the help and solved every problem with the stroke of a pen, it would change how everyone saw them. They wouldn't be the hard-working couple rebuilding after tragedy. They'd be the rich woman and her charity case husband playing at frontier life. The lie had grown bigger than just the two of them. It had become structural, foundational, weight-bearing, and Evelyn had no idea how to dismantle it without bringing everything crashing down. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of bone-deep exhaustion and small victories. Caleb and Tom Henderson spent 3 days dismantling the old chimney stone by stone, numbering each piece with chalk so they could rebuild it exactly. Evelyn worked alongside them when she could, mixing mortar and hauling water, her hands blistering despite the gloves. In the evenings, she sewed by lamplight, Sarah Henderson's wedding dress taking shape in cream-colored silk that Mary had traded for, along with 3 everyday dresses for the younger children. The foundation trenches were dug on a Tuesday, all 4 Henderson men and Caleb working from dawn until the stars came out. Evelyn cooked for them, stretching their meager supplies into stew that somehow fed 7 people, then sat with Mary on overturned buckets while the men talked about load-bearing walls and proper drainage. "You're running low on supplies," Mary observed, watching Evelyn scrape the bottom of the flour barrel the next morning. "We'll manage until Saturday's market." Evelyn kept her voice light, though the truth sat heavy in her chest. They were down to beans, a little cornmeal, and some wild greens she'd foraged. Caleb had sold another tool from his salvaged collection to the blacksmith, getting barely enough to cover their immediate needs. She could end this. One trip to the bank in the nearest large town, a withdrawal of even a fraction of her inheritance, and they'd have food for months. But every time she considered it, she saw Caleb's face when Mrs. Patterson had mentioned his debt. The shame, the way he'd physically recoiled from the words. "Here." Mary pressed a wrapped bundle into Evelyn's hands. "Leftover ham from Sunday and some preserves Tom's mother made. We've got more than we can use." "Mary, I can't." "You can and you will. That's what neighbors do." Mary's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, you're making Sarah's dress for half what you should be charging. Consider it fair trade." Evelyn accepted the bundle, throat tight. "Thank you. Thank me by not letting that stubborn husband of yours work himself to death. He was up before dawn again this morning. I saw him from our east field." He was always up before dawn. Evelyn would wake to the sound of him already working, hauling stone or cutting lumber or digging. She'd started getting up earlier herself, making coffee before he could refuse it, bandaging his hands when the rough work split his scars open again. They didn't talk much during these early mornings, just worked side by side in the pre-dawn darkness, their breath-forming clouds in the cooling air. On Saturday, Evelyn rode into town alone. Caleb had protested, but she'd insisted. He was needed at the building site, and she could handle the market herself. The truth was, she needed space to breathe, room to think without the constant weight of his presence reminding her of everything she was hiding. The market was held in the town square, a dusty open space between the general store and the church. Farmers had set up tables displaying produce, eggs, fresh-baked goods. Women clustered in small groups, trading gossip along with their wares. Evelyn felt eyes on her as she dismounted. The new woman, Caleb Rourke's unexpected wife, still a curiosity. Mrs. Patterson waved her over to a table near the store. Evelyn, come meet some folks. This is Mrs. Collins, the preacher's wife I mentioned. The woman who stepped forward was perhaps 40, dressed in severe black with her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to lift her eyebrows. Mrs. Rourke, I've heard quite a bit about you. All terrible, I'm sure, Evelyn said with a small smile. Mrs. Collins didn't return it. I heard you're a seamstress. The church auxiliary is making quilts for the orphanage in San Antonio. We meet Thursday afternoons. Your skills would be most welcome. It was phrased as an invitation, but it felt like a summons. Evelyn recognized the type, a woman who ran her social circles like a general commanding troops, expecting compliance and punishing deviation. I'd be happy to contribute when I can, Evelyn said carefully. Though with the rebuilding, my time is somewhat limited. Of course, the rebuilding, Mrs. Collins' lips pursed. It must be quite difficult living in a barn. So primitive. There was judgment in every syllable. Evelyn felt her spine straighten. It's temporary. And honestly, I've lived in worse conditions in Philadelphia. At least the barn doesn't have rats. Mrs. Patterson coughed to cover a laugh. Mrs. Collins' expression froze. Well, I suppose one must make do with what one has. Mrs. Collins turned to leave, then paused. Do give my regards to your husband. Such a tragic figure. It's a blessing he found someone willing to overlook his circumstances. The words landed like a slap. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Collins had already swept away, her black skirts swishing importantly. Don't mind her, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. She thinks suffering makes people holy. Probably jealous that you actually seem happy despite everything. I'm not sure happy is the word I'd use. No? Then what word would you use? Evelyn considered this, watching the market activity swirl around them. Purposeful. Like I'm building towards something real instead of just existing. That's a better word than happy anyway. Happy's just a mood. Purpose lasts. Mrs. Patterson handed her a small package. Payment for the mending you did on my Sunday dress. And Sarah Henderson's here. She's been dying to talk about her wedding dress. Sarah turned out to be a sweet-faced girl of 19, nervous and excited in equal measure. They spent an hour discussing designs, with Evelyn sketching possibilities on a scrap of paper while Sarah changed her mind a dozen times about sleeves and necklines and trim. Finally, they settled on something simple but elegant. Fitted bodice, modest neckline, long sleeves with pearl buttons. It's going to be beautiful, Sarah breathed, clutching the sketch. James is going to think I'm beautiful. You'll be beautiful because you're happy, Evelyn said. The dress is just decoration. Sarah blushed and thanked her profusely before running off to show her mother the design. Evelyn watched her go, remembering what it felt like to be 19 and full of uncomplicated hope, before her father died, before the inheritance and the circling men and the need to disappear. She was packing up her sewing supplies when a man approached, well-dressed by frontier standards, maybe 35, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from money or position. Mrs. Rourke, I'm Robert Langford. I own the bank here in town. Evelyn's stomach clenched. Mr. Langford. I wanted to introduce myself properly. Also wanted to let you know that if you and your husband need any financial assistance with the rebuilding, the bank offers very reasonable loan terms. That's kind of you, but we're managing. Are you? His smile didn't reach his eyes. I couldn't help but notice that Caleb sold some tools to the blacksmith last week. That's usually a sign of difficulties. It's a sign of practical resource management. Evelyn kept her voice level. We're trading what we don't need for what we do need. Of course, of course. I just want you to know the option exists. A loan of, say, $300 at reasonable interest could make all the difference. You could hire proper help, finish the house before winter, get your lives established. He paused meaningfully. I understand you came from Philadelphia. Surely you're not accustomed to such rustic living conditions. There was something oily about his persistence, something that made Evelyn's skin crawl. We appreciate the offer, Mr. Langford, but we prefer to build without debt hanging over us. Pride before practicality. How admirable. His tone suggested it was anything but. Well, when, not if, but when You change your mind, you know where to find me." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Evelyn standing there with a cold feeling in her chest. She'd dealt with men like Langford in Philadelphia, men who circled financial vulnerability like vultures, waiting for desperation to set in so they could swoop down with terms that seemed generous but came with chains attached. The ride home was quiet, her mind churning. She had money, enough money to never worry about men like Langford, enough to rebuild the homestead twice over and still live comfortably for years. And here she was, watching Caleb sell his tools, accepting charity from neighbors, worrying about winter supplies. It was insane. It was cruel to Caleb, making him struggle when she could help. And yet, when she arrived back at the homestead, she found Caleb and Tom Henderson framing the first wall, their voices carrying across the open space as they called out measurements and adjustments. They'd made real progress. The foundation was in, stone laid with precision, and now the skeleton of the house was starting to rise from the earth. Caleb looked up when he heard Smoke's hooves, and his face lit up in a way that made her chest ache. "Evelyn, come look. We got the front wall framed." She dismounted and walked over, studying the framework critically. It was good work, the joints tight, the posts plumb, everything measured and checked. "It's perfect." "Not perfect, but it'll hold." Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt. "How was the market?" "Productive. I met with Sarah about the dress, picked up some sewing work, and was informed that I'm primitive for living in a barn." Tom laughed. "Let me guess. Mrs. Collins?" "She's a piece of work, that one," Tom said. "Don't let her get under your skin. She thinks anyone who doesn't suffer properly isn't doing Christianity right." They worked until sunset, Evelyn helping to hold boards steady while Caleb and Tom nailed them in place. When Tom finally left for home, promising to return Tuesday with his sons, Caleb stood back and surveyed what they'd built. "It's happening," he said quietly. "We're actually doing this. Did you doubt we would?" "Every single day." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his scars were just shadows, his eyes dark and serious. "Every morning I wake up expecting you to have left in the night, taken Smoke and headed back to civilization. Why would I do that? Because this is hard, Evelyn. Harder than I think you knew it would be. And you're—" He gestured vaguely. "You're too good at this. Too competent. Too everything. You could be living a comfortable life somewhere, married to a man who could actually provide for you. Instead, you're here, sleeping in a barn, eating beans and wild greens, working until your hands bleed. So are you. I don't have a choice. This is all I've got." His voice roughened. "But you chose this, and I keep waiting to find out why." Evelyn's heart hammered. This was it, the moment to tell him the truth, to admit that she had choices he couldn't imagine, resources he didn't know existed, that she'd chosen this life not because it was all she could have, but because it was what she wanted. The words formed on her tongue. The truth pushed at her teeth, and then she looked at his face, proud, scarred, afraid, and she couldn't do it. Not yet. Not when he was finally starting to believe in his own worth, in the partnership they were building, not when the truth might shatter everything they'd created. "I chose this because I was tired of being alone," she said instead, which was also true. "I was tired of living in a single room, sewing clothes for other people's lives, having nothing that was mine. Here, I'm building something. With you. That's worth more than comfort." Caleb studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for the lie. Finally, he nodded. "All right. I won't question it again." But he would. She could see it in his eyes, the doubt, the wondering, the sense that something didn't quite add up. He was too smart not to notice the inconsistencies, the expensive tools she shouldn't have been able to afford on a seamstress's salary. The medical supplies that suggested resources beyond what she'd claimed, the way she never worried about money, even when they were down to their last dollar. Sooner or later, he'd find out. And when he did, it would destroy him. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness of the tack room, listening to the wind rattling the barn walls, and finally made a decision. She got up, lit the lamp, and opened her trunk with shaking hands. The false bottom came up easily. She'd designed it herself back in Philadelphia, lined with oilcloth to protect the contents. Underneath lay bundled papers, bank certificates, property deeds, and letters. So many letters from men she'd never met, all written after word of her inheritance spread through Philadelphia like wildfire. She pulled out one bundle, letters from a man named Charles Whitmore who'd called himself a business partner, but whose proposals made it clear he saw her money as his future. Another bundle from a supposed cousin, claiming family ties she knew were fabricated. A thick packet from a lawyer representing a man who'd promised to manage her affairs while she devoted herself to more feminine pursuits. Every single one of them had wanted her money, not her. Not her skills or her partnership or her thoughts on anything. Just the inheritance she'd received through her mother's maiden aunt, a woman who'd worked as a milliner for 50 years and saved every penny, who died alone and left everything to the only family member who'd ever visited her out of actual affection instead of mercenary hope. Evelyn had fled Philadelphia because she'd realized something terrible. She would never know if any man wanted her for herself. The money contaminated everything, turned every interaction into a potential transaction, made her suspicious of every kindness and every smile. So she'd hidden it, created a new identity as a simple seamstress, answered an advertisement from a man looking for a working partner, not a wealthy bride. And for the first time in 2 years, she'd felt seen as a person instead of a prize. But now the lie was eating her alive. She started to put the papers back, then paused. Hidden among the legal documents was something else, a letter she'd received just before leaving Philadelphia. From her mother's lawyer informing her that the aunt had included a specific instruction in her will. Use this money to build something meaningful. Don't let it make you small. Evelyn had almost forgotten about that line. Now it seemed to burn through the paper. Build something meaningful. She looked at the money, then at the barn walls around her, at the tack room that had become her temporary home, at the life she and Caleb were building together through sweat and partnership and honest work. This was meaningful. This was real. But it was also built on a lie. The lamp flickered and Evelyn made a second decision. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Dear Caleb, she wrote, then stopped. What could she say? I lied to you? I've been lying every day since I arrived? I have enough money to rebuild this homestead 10 times over, and I've been watching you sell your tools and accept charity because I was too cowardly to tell you the truth? She crumpled the paper and started again. This time, she didn't address it to anyone. She just wrote facts. The amount of the inheritance, where it was kept, what her plans were for it. A confession without apology, because she didn't know how to apologize for something she'd do again under the same circumstances. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her traveling dress. The one nice outfit she'd brought from Philadelphia, hanging on a peg in the corner of the tack room. If something happened to her, if she died or disappeared, Caleb would find it eventually. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She blew out the lamp and lay back down, staring at the darkness of the ceiling. Tomorrow they'd raise the second wall. By the end of the week, the frame would be complete. In a month, maybe less, they'd have a roof. A real home instead of ruins and barn. And someday, somehow, she'd find the courage to tell Caleb the truth. But not yet. Not when everything was still so fragile. Not when one wrong word could shatter the trust they'd built. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, the sound lonely and wild. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried not to think about how many more nights she could keep this secret before it consumed her completely. The discovery came on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks later. Evelyn was in town, meeting with Mrs. Collins about the church quilts despite her better judgment. Caleb was at the building site alone, working on interior framing. He'd offered to wait until Evelyn returned, but she'd insisted he keep working. They were so close to being weather-tight, and the first real cold snap was forecast for the following week. He was measuring for window placements when he realized he'd left his pencil in the barn. Cursing his own forgetfulness, he walked back to retrieve it, wiping sawdust from his hands. The barn was dim and quiet, familiar as his own skin after weeks of living there. He went to the workbench they'd set up, rifling through tools and supplies. No pencil. It must be in the tack room. Evelyn had been making notes for the dress orders the night before, might have borrowed his. Caleb hesitated at the door. The tack room was Evelyn's private space. He'd made a point of never entering without permission, of respecting the boundary they'd established. But it was just a pencil, and she'd be gone for hours. He pushed open the door. The room was neat, as always. Evelyn kept it organized with almost military precision. Her trunk sat against one wall, the bed he'd made for her stretched along the other. Her sewing supplies were arranged on a small table near the window, her few dresses hung on pegs. No pencil on the table. He checked the windowsill, then reluctantly approached the trunk. Maybe she'd put it inside for safekeeping. The trunk wasn't locked. It opened easily under his hands, revealing the organized chaos of her belongings, fabric scraps, thread, the medical supplies she'd mentioned. He lifted a layer of fabric, looking for the pencil. His hand hit something solid, a wooden panel that didn't quite fit flush with the bottom of the trunk. Caleb froze, his carpenter's eye immediately recognizing what he was seeing. A false bottom. Deliberately constructed, carefully hidden. He should close the trunk. Walk away. Wait for Evelyn to return and ask her directly if she'd seen his pencil. But his hands moved without conscious thought, finding the hidden catch, lifting the panel. Papers. Stacks of them, wrapped in oilcloth. Official-looking documents with bank seals and legal language. Caleb pulled one out, unfolded it with shaking hands. A bank certificate from Philadelphia, made out to Evelyn Hart, for the amount of $22,500. The number didn't make sense. He read it again. Again. $22,500. He pulled out another document. Another certificate, different bank. $12,000. Another. Property deed. Another. Investment bonds. His hands moved faster, pulling out document after document, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. The numbers grew. 30,000, 40,000. More. Far more. When he finally stopped, breathing hard, the total in his head was somewhere around $43,000. 43,000. While he'd been selling his tools for grocery money, while he'd been accepting charity from neighbors, while he'd been lying awake at night worrying about how they'd afford lumber, she'd had $43,000 hidden in her trunk. The room seemed to tilt. Caleb sat down hard on the edge of her bed, still holding the papers, still trying to make his brain accept what his eyes were seeing. She'd lied. About everything. About being a poor seamstress, about running from a hard life, about needing this partnership as much as he did. This wasn't a partnership. This was, what? A game? Charity? Some kind of experiment where a rich woman played at frontier living while her real life waited safely in a bank account? The papers crumpled in his hands. Caleb forced himself to set them down carefully, mechanically folding each document and returning it to its oilcloth wrapping. His hands were steady, but something inside his chest was screaming. He put everything back exactly as he'd found it. Closed the false bottom. Arranged the fabric on top just as it had been. Closed the trunk. Then he walked out of the barn and kept walking. He didn't go back to the building site. Couldn't bear the thought of working on walls that suddenly felt like a mockery. What did any of it matter? She could buy 10 houses tomorrow if she wanted, could hire an army of builders, could pack up and leave for Philadelphia any time she got tired of playing poor. Caleb walked until he reached the dry creek bed at the northern property line. He sat on a flat rock and stared at nothing, his mind churning. Every moment replayed differently now. Her arriving with tools and supplies, of course she had them. She could afford anything. Her calm acceptance of the ruins, why wouldn't she be calm when she had enough money to rebuild instantly? Her insistence on working alongside him, was she just amusing herself? Seeing how long she could maintain the charade? And the worst part, the part that made his chest feel like it was being crushed, he'd started to believe in it. In them. In the partnership they were building. He'd started to think maybe, just maybe, someone could want him for himself instead of despite himself. But it was all a lie. The sun moved across the sky. Caleb sat and stared and felt something break inside him that he didn't know how to fix. When Evelyn returned from town, the sun was setting and Caleb still hadn't come back to the building site. She found him in the barn, throwing his few belongings into a worn saddlebag with sharp, violent movements. "What are you doing?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "Leaving." "What? Why?" "Found something interesting in your trunk today." His voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Was looking for a pencil. Found your little secret instead." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "Caleb, don't." He finally looked at her, and the expression in his eyes made her take a step back. Don't explain. Don't apologize. Don't tell me you had your reasons. I don't want to hear it. You have to let me. I don't have to let you do anything. He yanked the saddlebag closed. You want to know what I have to do? I have to leave before I say something we'll both regret. I have to get away from this place and from you and from whatever sick game you've been playing. It's not a game. Evelyn's voice cracked. Caleb, please, just listen. Listen to what? More lies? He grabbed his coat. How much is it, by the way? I saw at least 40,000 in those papers. Is there more? More hidden accounts? More property? Just how rich are you, Evelyn? She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up, and tears were burning behind her eyes. That's what I thought. Caleb headed for the door, then turned back. You know what the worst part is? Every nail I drove, every board I cut, every day I worked until I couldn't stand up straight. You watched me do it all while sitting on enough money to hire it done 10 times over. You let me sell my tools, let me accept charity from the Hendersons, let me feel like a failure who couldn't even rebuild his own damn house without help. His voice broke. Why? Was it funny? Watching the scarred man struggle? No. The word burst from her. That's not... I never thought... Then what did you think? He stepped toward her, and she saw the pain beneath the anger, raw and bleeding. What possible reason could you have for this? For lying to me every single day? For making me feel like we were in this together when you could have walked away any time you wanted? Because I didn't want to walk away. Evelyn's voice rose to match his. I came here because in Philadelphia, every man who looked at me saw dollar signs. Every conversation, every interaction, it was all about the money. Always the money. I couldn't trust anyone. Couldn't believe anyone actually wanted me instead of my inheritance. She wiped her eyes angrily. Your letter asked for a partner, a worker, someone willing to build a life through honest labor, not someone's bank account. For the first time in 2 years, I had a chance to be valued for myself. So yes, I hid the money. I lied. Because I wanted to know if someone could want me without it. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. Caleb's voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. You used me. Used my letter, my hope for partnership, my struggle, all of it, to run some kind of test on whether you were likable without money. He shook his head slowly. Did I pass? Did I want you enough? Was my struggling sufficient proof of my pure intentions? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. He slung the saddlebag over his shoulder. Every day I worked myself half to death trying to give you something better, trying to prove I was worth the risk you took in coming here. And you already had everything. You were just watching to see how long I'd dance. Where are you going? I don't know. Town, the Hendersons, anywhere but here. He paused at the door. The house is framed and weather-tight. You can hire someone to finish it. You can afford it. Caleb, please. But he was already gone, the barn door swinging shut behind him with a sound like finality. Evelyn stood alone in the empty barn, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, and finally let herself cry. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat in the tack room with the lamp burning low, staring at the trunk that had held her secret for so long. The false bottom was still closed, still hiding what Caleb now knew existed. It seemed absurd that something so small could have destroyed everything. When dawn came gray and cold, she made herself stand, made herself dress, made herself walk out to the building site where the frame of their house stood skeletal against the morning sky. The house looked different now. Empty, like bones without flesh, a promise that would never be kept. She ran her hand along one of the support beams Caleb had cut and shaped with such care, feeling the smooth grain under her palm. He'd been right about one thing. You couldn't lie with a wall. It either stood or it didn't. Their wall was still standing, but everything else had fallen. She worked anyway. Picked up where Caleb had left off, measuring and cutting boards for interior walls. Her hands remembered her father's lessons, the angle of the saw, the pressure needed to drive a nail true. The physical work gave her mind something to do besides replay Caleb's words on endless repeat. You used me. You used my letter, my hope for partnership, my struggle, all of it. Had she? Evelyn paused, hammer raised, and forced herself to examine the question honestly. She'd told herself she was running from men who wanted her money, seeking someone who'd value her for herself. But had she ever considered what Caleb was running from? What he needed from this partnership? He'd needed to prove he could build something, that the fire hadn't destroyed his ability to create, to provide, to be worth something. And she'd taken that from him by hiding resources that could have made everything easier. She'd turned his struggle into a test he didn't know he was taking. The hammer slipped from her numb fingers and hit the ground with a dull thud. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from being used that she hadn't seen how she was using him, making him perform his worth while she sat in judgment with a fortune hidden in her trunk. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. Evelyn picked up the hammer and kept working. She didn't know what else to do. 3 days passed. Caleb didn't return. Evelyn finished the interior framing alone, working from dawn until she couldn't see straight, then falling into exhausted sleep in the tack room. She ate sparingly from the supplies they'd accumulated, her appetite gone. The silence of the homestead pressed in on her like a physical weight. On the 4th day, Mary Henderson appeared riding a sturdy mare, a basket tied to her saddle. She took one look at Evelyn's face and dismounted without a word. "Where's Caleb?" Mary asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Gone." Evelyn's voice came out flat. "He found out about the money." Mary nodded slowly. "Tom said he showed up at our place 3 nights ago. Wouldn't talk about what happened, just asked if he could sleep in the barn and work off his keep. He's been cutting firewood like a man possessed. He hates me." "I doubt that's the word I'd use." Mary set the basket down and studied the house frame. "You've made good progress." "It doesn't matter." "Doesn't it?" Mary turned back to her. "Evelyn, what exactly did you do?" So Evelyn told her, all of it, the inheritance, the circling men in Philadelphia, the lie about being a poor seamstress, the money hidden in the trunk. Mary listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When Evelyn finished, Mary was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That was foolish." "I know. But I understand why you did it." Mary sat down on a stack of lumber, gesturing for Evelyn to join her. "You wanted to be seen, valued for yourself instead of your bank account. That's not wrong." "But the way I did it was." "Yes, it was." Mary's honesty cut clean. "You made Caleb's pride into a weapon against him. Every day he struggled, you had the power to help and chose not to. That's not partnership. That's something else." Evelyn felt tears burning again. "I didn't mean to hurt him." Intentions don't change outcomes. Mary pulled a piece of paper from her apron pocket. "He asked me to give you this." Evelyn's hat shook as she unfolded it. Caleb's handwriting, rough and angular. "I've been thinking about what you said, about men in Philadelphia wanting your money. I understand that fear now, the not knowing if someone wants you for the right reasons. But here's what you don't understand. You did the same thing to me that they tried to do to you. You took my struggle and made it about testing me, about seeing if I was good enough, pure enough in my intentions. You had all the power, and you watched me work myself half to death to prove my worth. That's not partnership. That's the same game you ran from, just with different players. I need time to figure out if I can forgive that. I need time to figure out if I want to. The house is yours. You paid for it whether you spent the money or not. Every board, every nail. You could have stopped the struggle any time. That makes it yours by right of withheld mercy. Do what you want with it. I'm taking work at the Henderson place until I figure out what comes next." Evelyn read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. "He's right," she said quietly. "About some of it, yes. About other parts." Mary shook her head. "He's hurting and angry, so he's being absolute. But relationships aren't absolute. They're messy and complicated, and people make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice I made every single day." "Then make a different choice now." Mary stood up. "You want to know what I think? I think you're both running from the same fear, that you're not enough on your own, that you need to prove your worth through struggle or money or whatever measure you've chosen. And until you both figure out that your worth isn't something that needs proving, you're going to keep hurting each other." After Mary left, Evelyn sat alone with Caleb's letter and the half-built house. The afternoon sun slanted through the frame, casting geometric shadows across the ground. This was supposed to be their home, the place they built together. But Caleb was right. She'd paid for it in ways that had nothing to do with money. She'd paid for it with his trust, his pride, his belief that they were partners. That night, Evelyn made a decision. She pulled out paper and began to write. Not to Caleb this time, but to the town council. A formal proposal, carefully worded. She worked by lamplight until the words were exactly right, then sealed it and set it aside for Saturday's market. The next morning, she rode into town early. Mrs. Patterson looked up from arranging goods on the store's front table, her sharp eyes taking in Evelyn's pale face and the dark circles under her eyes. "Heard Caleb staying at the Hendersons," she said without preamble. "That true?" "Yes." "Also heard why." Mrs. Patterson crossed her arms. "You want to tell me your side of it?" "Not particularly." Evelyn handed over the sealed proposal. "But I do need this delivered to Mayor Clifton. It's a formal request to present at the next town council meeting." Mrs. Patterson took the envelope, studying it. "What's it about?" "A proposal to build a medical clinic. I'm offering to fund the construction and first 2 years of operating expenses." Evelyn's voice was steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her. "The town needs a proper doctor's office, somewhere clean and well supplied. I have the resources to make it happen." "And you're doing this because—" "Because my aunt left me a fortune with the instruction to build something meaningful. I've been trying to figure out what that meant." Evelyn met Mrs. Patterson's eyes. "I think this is it." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Using money to do good doesn't erase using it badly first." "I know, but I have to start somewhere." The older woman nodded and tucked the envelope into her apron. "I'll make sure the mayor gets it. Council meets Tuesday evening at the church." She paused. "For what it's worth, a clinic's a good idea. Doc Brennan's office is a disaster, and we lose too many children to simple infections that could be treated if we had proper facilities." "That's what I'm hoping to change." Evelyn spent the next week preparing. She rode to the county seat and arranged to have funds transferred from her Philadelphia accounts to a local bank. Not Langford's, she made sure of that. She drew up detailed plans for the clinic building, using her father's architectural knowledge to design something functional and efficient. She researched medical supply companies and equipment costs. She drafted a contract that would protect the town's interest and ensure the clinic remained a community resource, not her personal project. She didn't try to see Caleb, didn't send messages or ask Mary to intervene. She'd done enough manipulating, enough trying to control outcomes. If he wanted to talk, he knew where to find her. The work on the house continued. Evelyn hired 2 men from town, young, strong, needing the wages, to help with the heavy lifting she couldn't manage alone. She paid them fair rates from the money she'd finally acknowledged existed. The roof went on. The windows were installed. Interior walls took shape. It felt hollow, like building a monument to her own mistakes. Tuesday evening came cold and clear. Evelyn arrived at the church 15 minutes before the council meeting, wearing her best dress and carrying a leather folder containing her proposal and supporting documents. The church was filling up. Council meetings were apparently a form of entertainment and redemption, where people gathered to argue about road maintenance and zoning disputes. She saw Caleb the moment she entered. He was sitting in the back row with Tom Henderson, his face carefully blank when their eyes met. Evelyn's heart clenched, but she forced herself to nod politely and take a seat near the front. Mayor Clifton called the meeting to order. He was a portly man in his 60s, with the kind of booming voice that suggested he'd once been a preacher or politician. He worked through routine business first, a dispute about a property line, approval for a new well, discussion of winter road maintenance. Then he cleared his throat. "Last item on the agenda, Mrs. Evelyn Rourke has submitted a proposal to the council. Mrs. Rourke, would you like to present?" Evelyn stood, folder in hand, and faced the room. At least 50 people stared back at her, most of them strangers, all of them curious. She found Caleb's face in the crowd and forced herself to look away. "Members of the council, neighbors, and friends." Her voice carried clearly through the room. "I'm here to propose the construction of a medical clinic for redemption, a permanent facility with proper examination rooms, surgical equipment, and space for patient care. I'm offering to fund the entire construction cost and the first 2 years of operating expenses, including salary for a qualified doctor, should one be willing to relocate here. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Collins made a disapproving sound. Mayor Clifton held up his hand for silence. That's quite generous, Mrs. Rourke. What's the estimated cost we're discussing? Approximately $8,000 for construction and initial equipment. Another $4,000 for operating expenses over 2 years. Evelyn opened her folder and pulled out a detailed budget. I have itemized costs here if the council would like to review them. $8,000. Councilman Davies, a rancher who served as treasurer, looked skeptical. That's more money than most of us will see in a lifetime. Forgive me for asking, but where exactly is a seamstress from Philadelphia getting that kind of capital? I inherited it. Evelyn kept her voice level. My mother's aunt was a milliner in Philadelphia. She worked for 50 years and never married, investing wisely and living frugally. When she died 2 years ago, she left her entire estate to me, the only family member who'd visited her out of affection instead of expectation. And you want to give it away? Mrs. Collins spoke up, her tone suggesting this was somehow morally suspect. I want to use it for something meaningful. My aunt's will included specific instructions to build something that matters, something that helps people. Evelyn looked around the room. How many children has this town lost to infections that could have been treated? How many people suffer because Doc Brennan's office is inadequate or because he's not sober enough to help? How many times has someone died because we don't have proper medical facilities? The room went quiet. Everyone knew the answer. Everyone had lost someone. The clinic would belong to the town, Evelyn continued, not to me. I'm proposing a board of trustees to oversee operations, community members who ensure the facility serves everyone fairly. I'll provide the initial funding, but the clinic's future would rest in your hands. Mayor Clifton studied the budget documents. This is very detailed. You've put real thought into this. I have. I've also researched doctors who might be willing to relocate. There's a young physician in San Antonio, just finished his training, idealistic, looking for a place to practice where he's needed. I've written to him. He's interested. Councilman Davies leaned forward. What's in this for you, Mrs. Rourke? Nobody gives away $8,000 without wanting something back. It was the question Evelyn had been waiting for. She set down the folder and spoke directly to the room. I'll be honest with you all. I made a serious mistake when I came to redemption. I hid my financial situation from my husband, let him struggle and work himself to exhaustion while I sat on resources that could have helped. I told myself I had good reasons. I'd been pursued by men who only wanted my money, and I wanted to know if someone could value me without it. She paused. But the truth is, I was being selfish. I was testing him without his knowledge or consent. I was using his pride against him, and when he found out, I lost his trust. Probably forever. She could feel Caleb's eyes on her now, burning into her back. I can't undo that mistake, but I can stop hiding. I can stop pretending the money doesn't exist, and I can use it the way my aunt intended, to build something meaningful. Evelyn's voice strengthened. This clinic isn't about buying forgiveness or purchasing a good reputation. It's about the fact that I have resources this community needs, and children are dying while I debate whether my pride or my husband's pride matters more. It doesn't. What matters is whether we save the next child who gets an infection, whether we have a place to treat injuries properly, whether we build something that lasts longer than our mistakes. The silence in the room was profound. Mayor Clifton cleared his throat. That's remarkably honest, Mrs. Rourke. It's the least I owe this community. You welcomed me when I was a stranger. The Hendersons helped us rebuild. Mrs. Patterson gave me work. Mary Henderson gave me friendship. You all invested in me and Caleb when you had no reason to. Evelyn's throat tightened. I'd like to invest back. Not as charity, as partnership. The same thing I should have offered my husband from the start. More silence. Then Tom Henderson stood up from the back row. I think we should accept, he said clearly. My youngest daughter nearly died from pneumonia last winter. Doc Brennan was too drunk to help. Mary had to nurse her through it alone, and we almost lost her. If we'd had a proper clinic, a sober doctor, she'd have been treated properly from the start. His voice roughened. I'll serve on that board of trustees. Make sure the money's used right. Mary Henderson stood next to him. I'll serve too, and I think Evelyn's learned more about partnership in the past week than most of us learn in a lifetime. She's owning her mistakes publicly. That takes courage. Others began to stand. The blacksmith, Mrs. Patterson. Even Councilman Davies nodded slowly. I move that we accept Mrs. Rourke's proposal, Mayor Clifton said. All in favor? A chorus of aye filled the church. Motion carries, the mayor smiled. Mrs. Rourke, it seems you're about to build a clinic. Evelyn sat down, her legs suddenly weak. It was done. The money was no longer a secret. The town knew what she had and what she planned to do with it. But only one person's opinion truly mattered, and he was walking out of the church without looking back. Evelyn caught up with Caleb outside, in the darkness beyond the church's lamplight. He was striding toward the hitching post where Tom's wagon waited, his shoulders rigid. Caleb, please, just give me 5 minutes. He stopped but didn't turn around. That was quite a performance in there. It wasn't a performance. It was the truth. The truth. He laughed bitterly. Now you're interested in the truth. I've always been interested in the truth. I just didn't know how to tell it without losing everything. Evelyn moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. You were right. About all of it. I used you. I tested you. I watched you struggle and told myself it was for good reasons when really I was just protecting myself. And now you're fixing it by building a clinic? His voice dripped sarcasm. Buying the town's approval with your guilty conscience? No, I'm building the clinic because children are dying and I can help prevent it. That's separate from us. From this. She gestured between them. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness, Caleb. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just trying to stop hiding. You want applause for basic honesty? I want you to understand that I know I was wrong, that I'm not asking you to come back or forgive me or anything else. Her voice cracked. I just want you to know that the partnership was real for me. Even though I lied about the money, everything else was true. The work, the planning, the belief that we were building something together. That was all real. Caleb stared at her, his scarred face unreadable in the shadows. You know what hurts most? Not the money, not even the lying. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. What hurts is that you never trusted me enough to tell the truth. You thought I'd change if I knew. Thought I'd see you differently, want you for the wrong reasons. And maybe you were right. Maybe I would have. But you never gave me the chance to prove otherwise. I was afraid. So was I. Every single day. His voice roughened. I was afraid you'd see how broken I am, how little I have to offer, how much I'm still haunted by the fire, by people's stares, by the constant feeling that I'm not enough. But I showed you that fear anyway, worked beside you, let you see me struggle, trusted you with the worst parts of myself. He paused. You never trusted me with yours. Evelyn felt tears sliding down her face. You're right. I know I'm right. That's not the question. Caleb looked away, his jaw working. The question is whether knowing you're right changes anything. Does it? He was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought he might not answer. Then he said, I don't know yet. I'm still too angry to think straight, still too hurt to see past it. I understand. Do you? He looked at her again, and the pain in his eyes was raw enough to make her flinch. Because I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure you understand what it's like to have nothing. To measure your worth by what you can build with your own hands because it's the only currency you have. And then to find out that while you were breaking yourself to prove that worth, someone was watching with the power to make it all unnecessary and chose not to. I'm sorry. The words felt pathetically inadequate. I'm so sorry, Caleb. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust. He turned toward the wagon. But maybe the clinic will save a life. That's worth something, even if we're not. He climbed onto the wagon beside Tom Henderson, who'd been waiting silently through the entire exchange. As they pulled away, Evelyn stood in the darkness and let herself cry properly for the first time since Caleb had left. She'd told the truth finally, owned her mistakes publicly, committed the money to something meaningful. but she'd still lost the one thing that had made any of it matter. The following week, Evelyn threw herself into the clinic project with desperate energy. She met with contractors, approved construction plans, ordered medical equipment from supply companies in San Antonio and Austin. The town council appointed the board of trustees, Tom and Mary Henderson, Mrs. Patterson, Doc Brennan, sober and surprisingly competent when given purpose, and Councilman Davies. The building site was chosen on a lot near the center of town, and construction began immediately. Evelyn was there every day, watching the foundation go in, checking the framing, making sure every detail met the specifications she'd laid out. It was easier than going back to the homestead, where the finished house sat empty like an accusation. She'd moved the last of her things from the barn into the new house, but she rarely slept there. The rooms felt wrong without Caleb's presence. Too big, too quiet, too full of might-have-beens. Instead, she often worked until exhaustion forced her to collapse on the clinic's construction site, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars wheel overhead. "You're going to kill yourself at this pace," Mary said one afternoon, finding Evelyn on her knees mixing mortar despite having hired masons to do exactly that. "I need to stay busy. You need to sleep and eat and stop punishing yourself." Mary pulled Evelyn to her feet. "Come on, you're having dinner with us tonight. No arguments." The Henderson home was warm and loud with children, a sharp contrast to Evelyn's solitary existence. She helped Mary prepare the meal while Tom's boys argued about horses, and Sarah practiced her wedding vows in the corner. It was achingly normal, achingly painful to witness. Caleb wasn't there. He'd moved on from the Hendersons' barn to a boarding room above the saloon, taking work where he could find it. Mary reported that he was drinking too much and working too hard, the same destructive pattern Evelyn had fallen into. "You're both miserable," Mary observed, watching Evelyn push food around her plate. "Both punishing yourselves, both too stubborn to talk." "He doesn't want to talk to me." "Have you tried?" "Actually tried. Not just one conversation outside a church?" Evelyn was quiet. "He asked for time to figure out if he wants to forgive me. I'm giving him that." "Or you're hiding again, just in a different way." Mary's voice was gentle but firm. "You hid behind the lie before. Now you're hiding behind noble suffering and clinic building, but you're still not facing the real issue, which is that you love him, and you don't know how to love someone without fear controlling every choice you make." The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn set down her fork, her hands shaking. We barely know each other." "You built a house together, worked dawn to dark side by side, made plans for a future. That's knowing someone, Evelyn. The question is whether you have the courage to fight for it instead of just apologizing and running away." That night, lying in the empty house she'd wanted so badly, Evelyn finally let herself think about what Mary had said. She did love Caleb, had probably started loving him the moment he'd looked at her in the ruins and told her she shouldn't be there, even while his eyes had shown desperate hope that she'd stay. She loved his stubbornness and his pride and his refusal to accept defeat. She loved the way his scarred hand shaped wood into something beautiful. She loved the rare moments when he smiled and the world seemed less harsh. But Mary was also right that fear had controlled every choice. Fear of being used. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of giving someone the power to hurt her the way the circling men in Philadelphia had hurt her with their transparent greed. She'd protected herself by hurting Caleb first, and now she was losing him because she didn't know how to stop being afraid. The clinic's frame went up quickly. Evelyn had hired the best builders in 3 counties, paying premium wages for speed and quality. Within 2 weeks, the structure was weathertight and interior work had begun. The young doctor from San Antonio visited and pronounced himself delighted with the facilities. Medical supplies began arriving in crates marked fragile and important, and through it all, Evelyn watched for Caleb in town, hoping for another chance to talk, to explain, to beg if necessary. But he kept his distance, working jobs that took him out of redemption for days at a time, until the day he showed up at the clinic site unannounced. Evelyn was inside the partially finished building, helping install cabinets in what would become the examination room. She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, hat in hands, his expression unreadable. "Caleb," her heart hammered, "what are you doing here? Heard you hired Peterson's crew for the finished carpentry. He stepped inside, studying the work with a critical eye. They're good, but they don't know medical facilities. You'll want different cabinet heights, better lighting for surgical procedures, specialized ventilation. How do you know that? My uncle worked on a hospital addition once in St. Louis, before the war. He taught me some of the specialized requirements. But Caleb ran his hand along the cabinet installation, frowning. This is too low. Doctor will be hunched over. Needs to be at least 4 inches higher. Evelyn just stared at him, afraid to speak and break whatever fragile moment this was. I could help, he said quietly, still not looking at her. If you want, make sure it's built right. Make sure it actually saves lives instead of just looking good. I want that very much. He finally met her eyes. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I know. And we're not going back to how things were. I know that too. But the clinic matters, more than our problems. So I'm offering my skills where they're needed. He paused. As a contractor, with proper wages. This isn't charity. I wouldn't dream of offering it as such. Evelyn's voice was steady despite the hope blooming painful in her chest. When can you start? Now. They worked together through the afternoon, and it was both familiar and strange. The easy rhythm of shared labor was still there, but the comfort was gone. Every interaction was careful, formal, weighted with everything unsaid. Caleb suggested modifications, and Evelyn approved them. They measured and cut and installed in near silence, but they were working together again, building something. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. The clinic took shape over the following weeks, like something rising from shared intention rather than simple construction. Caleb arrived each morning before dawn, and Evelyn was always already there, coffee brewing over a small fire she'd built in the yard. They'd drink in silence, watching the sun break over the horizon, then work until the light failed. They didn't talk about the house standing empty on the homestead, didn't discuss their marriage or the money or anything beyond cabinet heights and window placements and the proper angle for surgical lighting. It was safe territory, neutral ground where they could exist side by side without the weight of everything broken between them. But small things changed. Caleb stopped correcting her when she handed him tools before he asked for them. Evelyn stopped flinching when their hands accidentally touched while holding boards steady. They fell into the old rhythm of partnership, though now it was laced with caution, each of them testing whether the foundation could hold weight again. On a cold November morning, Mary Henderson's youngest daughter collapsed during breakfast. By the time Mary got her to town, the girl was burning with fever, her breathing labored and rattling. Doc Brennan was sober enough to recognize pneumonia, but drunk enough that his hand shook too badly to start treatment. "The clinic," Mary said desperately, holding her daughter in the general store where she'd stopped for help. "Is any of it functional yet? Please." Evelyn and Caleb were installing the final window when they heard the commotion. They ran to the store and found Mary with little Emma. The girl's lips tinged blue, her small body racked with coughing. "Examination room's finished," Caleb said immediately, "and we've got the equipment unpacked. Evelyn, you said you had medical training." "My mother taught me nursing." "I'm not a doctor. You're what we've got." He was already scooping Emma from Mary's arms. "Come on." They ran to the clinic, Evelyn's mind racing through everything her mother had taught her about pneumonia. Keep the airway clear, reduce the fever, watch for fluid in the lungs, pray the infection hadn't progressed too far. The examination room was pristine and ready, even without the official opening. Caleb laid Emma on the table while Evelyn pulled out supplies with shaking hands, a thermometer, clean cloths, the tinctures and medicines she'd ordered from Philadelphia. "Mary, I need you to tell me everything," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "When did the fever start? Has she been coughing long? Any other symptoms?" Mary answered through tears while Evelyn worked, checking Emma's temperature, listening to her breathing, noting the rapid pulse and shallow respirations. The girl was worse than she'd initially thought. The infection had taken hold fast and hard. "We need to bring the fever down first," Evelyn said. "Caleb, there's ice in the cellar behind the general store. Get as much as you can carry. Mary, I need you to trust me. I've done this before, but it's going to be hard to watch." For the next 6 hours, they fought for Emma's life. Evelyn administered fever reducers and worked to keep the girls' airways clear while Caleb brought ice and fresh water and whatever else was needed. Doc Brennan appeared halfway through, sober and shaken, and guided Evelyn through the more complex treatments with steady instructions. "You've got good instincts," he told her quietly. "Your mother taught you well." By evening, Emma's fever had broken. Her breathing eased. Color returned to her lips. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Mama?" And Mary collapsed in tears of relief. Evelyn stepped outside the clinic, her hands still shaking with adrenaline and fear and the crushing weight of what could have happened. The town square was full of people who'd gathered when word spread, neighbors waiting to hear if the Henderson girl would live or die. Caleb found her leaning against the clinic wall, staring at nothing. "She's going to be all right," he said quietly. "This time. Because we got lucky. Because the clinic was far enough along to use." Evelyn's voice shook. "What about next time? What if we'd still been arguing about floor plans? What if the equipment hadn't arrived yet?" "But it did arrive. And you saved her." He stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold air. "That's what this place is for. That's what the money bought. A chance to save the next child. And the one after that." Evelyn turned to look at him. "Is that why you came back? To make sure the clinic worked properly?" "At first, yes." Caleb stared at the clinic building, light spilling from its windows into the darkness. "I told myself it was about the work, about building something that mattered, but watching you in there today fighting for that little girl's life." He stopped, his jaw working. "I realized something." "What?" "You could have stayed in Philadelphia, lived comfortably on that inheritance, never worked another day in your life, but you didn't. You came west looking for purpose. And yes, you lied about the money, but you were telling the truth about everything else. About wanting to build something real, about wanting to be valued for your work instead of your bank account." He finally looked at her. "I was so angry about the lie that I forgot about the truth underneath it." "The lie still hurt you?" "Yes, it did." His voice was quiet but steady. "And I'm still angry about it. Still hurt. But I'm also starting to understand why you did it, what you were running from." Evelyn felt tears burning. "I should have trusted you." "Yeah, you should have." He didn't soften it, didn't try to make it easier. "But I should have trusted you too. Should have asked why a seamstress had carpenter's tools and medical supplies. Should have wondered why you never seemed worried about money, even when we were down to our last dollar. I saw the inconsistencies and ignored them because it was easier than confronting what they might mean. We both failed each other." "We did." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Question is, do we fail better this time? Or do we just walk away?" Evelyn's heart hammered. "What do you want?" "Honestly, I don't know yet. Part of me wants to go back to how things were before I found the money. When I believed we were building something equal, something real." He rubbed his scarred hand across his face. "But we can't go back. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. Then we go forward." The words came out stronger than Evelyn felt. "We build something new, something honest this time." "How?" "I don't know. But I know I want to try." She took a breath. "I know the money terrifies you. Makes you feel small or unnecessary or whatever other lies your pride tells you. But here's the truth, Caleb. I couldn't have saved Emma today without you. Not just because you carried ice and fetched supplies, but because you made this place possible. You designed these rooms. You built these cabinets at the right height. You made sure the ventilation worked properly. Your skills, your knowledge, your work. That's what saved her life as much as any medicine. The money paid for it. Money is just paper. It doesn't cut wood or mix mortar or know the difference between a surgical cabinet and a regular one." Evelyn moved closer. "You keep measuring your worth by what you can provide financially. But that's not what makes you valuable. It's what you can build. What you know. Who you are when the work gets hard." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "I wouldn't say it otherwise." She echoed the words she'd spoken their first day together. "And I'll prove it to you." "How?" "Let me show you something." Evelyn led him back into the clinic, through the examination room where Mary still sat with Emma, into what would become the doctor's office. On the desk sat a leather folder she'd prepared weeks ago, but hadn't known how to present. She handed it to Caleb. "Open it." Inside were legal documents, carefully drafted by the lawyer she'd hired in the county seat. Caleb read slowly, his brow furrowing, then looked up at her in shock. "This puts half the inheritance in my name. Equal control, equal signature required for any expenditure over $100. Yes." "Why would you? This is your money. Your aunt left it to you." "She left it to me to build something meaningful, but she also knew I couldn't build it alone. Nobody can." Evelyn's voice was steady. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not trying to buy you back. I'm asking you to be my actual partner. Equal responsibility, equal authority, equal risk." "This is insane. What if I steal it? What if I spend it on whiskey and gambling? What if you don't?" She cut him off. "What if you're exactly who I think you are? A man who builds things that last, who works himself to exhaustion for people he cares about, who knows the value of honest labor." She paused. "I'm betting $43,000 that I'm right about you. That's how much I trust you, even if you don't trust me yet." Caleb stared at the documents like they might catch fire. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can, because it's not charity and it's not apology. It's partnership. Real partnership, the kind I should have offered from the beginning." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I know you're still hurt. I know you don't trust me, but maybe you can trust this. Trust that I'm done hiding, done controlling, done trying to protect myself by keeping you in the dark. Everything's on the table now. Literally everything." He set the folder down with shaking hands. "You're serious?" "Completely. And if I sign this, we're legally bound, joint assets. I can't just walk away." "Neither can I." She met his eyes. "That's the point." Caleb walked to the window, staring out at the dark square where people were finally dispersing, reassured that Emma would survive. His reflection in the glass looked haunted, conflicted. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "I understand. And I need you to understand something too." He turned back to her. "The money. It's not about the money itself. It's about what it represents. Every dollar you hid was a moment you didn't trust me. Every time you watched me struggle and didn't help, you were choosing your fear over our partnership." His voice roughened. "I can forgive the lie eventually. But I need to know you won't do it again. That you won't hide the next big thing or the thing after that because you're afraid of how I'll react." "I won't. I swear I won't." "You can't promise that, not really, because fear doesn't just disappear because you want it to." He moved closer. "But maybe we can promise to try. To talk when we're scared instead of hiding. To fight fair when we disagree. To build something where honesty matters more than being comfortable." Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. "I can promise to try." "Then that's where we start." Caleb looked at the folder again. "I'm not signing this tonight. I need to sit with it. Make sure I'm not just doing it because I want things to be okay again. Take all the time you need. But I'll come back to the homestead tomorrow. Not to the house. I'm not ready for that. But to the barn. We can talk there. Figure out what comes next." It wasn't everything Evelyn wanted, but it was more than she dared hope for. The next day broke cold and gray, with clouds promising rain before nightfall. Evelyn rode out to the homestead at dawn, her heart in her throat. She'd prepared herself for Caleb to change his mind, to decide he couldn't do this after all. But he was there, sitting on the same scorched beam where she'd first seen him, looking at the completed house that stood where ruins used to be. "I spent all night thinking," he said without preamble, "about the money, about trust, about what kind of man I want to be." He stood up, brushing soot from his trousers. "And I realized something. I've been measuring my worth by what I can provide, by what I can build with my own hands and my own money. But that's not partnership either. That's just pride wearing a different costume." Evelyn waited, afraid to speak and break whatever conclusion he was reaching. Real partnership means accepting help when it's offered, means trusting someone else to carry part of the weight, means believing that what I bring to the table has value, even if it's not measured in dollars. He pulled the folded documents from his pocket. "So I'll sign this. but on one condition. Anything. We use the money together, make decisions together, build things together, not just the clinic, but whatever comes next. And we do it honestly, even when honesty is hard, even when we're scared. He held out his hand. Equal partners. Starting now. Evelyn took his hand, feeling the rough texture of his scars against her palm. Equal partners. They signed the documents right there, using the flat surface of the burned beam as a desk, with only the empty land as witness. And when the papers were folded and put away, Caleb looked at the house again. "You finished it," he said quietly. "We finished it. The frame was yours, the design was yours. I just filled in the details. Should we look inside?" Evelyn's heart raced. "Do you want to?" "I think I need to. Need to see if it feels like ours or just yours." They walked to the house together, their footsteps crunching on the path Evelyn had worn between the barn and the building site. The front door, solid oak that Caleb had shaped before he'd left, swung open easily. Inside, the house was simple but well built. The main room had a fireplace constructed from the salvaged stone chimney, its mantel carved with both their initials in a moment of hope before everything had fallen apart. The kitchen was functional and efficient, with cabinets at the heights Caleb had specified. 2 bedrooms branched off the main space, and a loft above provided additional storage. But it was empty of life. No furniture except the table Caleb had built and abandoned. No curtains. No personal touches. Just bones without flesh. "It's a good house," Caleb said, walking through the rooms. "Solid construction, should last decades. But it feels like a monument instead of a home." He stood in the main room, looking at the cold fireplace, like something built to prove a point rather than lived in. "That's because I built it alone." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "Every board I placed, I kept thinking about how you should be here, how we should be deciding together where the windows went, whether the loft should be higher, all of it. It's technically finished, but it's not actually done. What would make it done? You. Us. Living in it together, making it messy and real and full of the arguments and compromises that make a place home instead of just a structure." Caleb turned to look at her, and something in his expression had softened. "I'm still angry sometimes. Still hurt when I think about the months you kept that secret. I know, you should be. But I'm also tired of punishing both of us for it. Tired of sleeping in a room above a saloon when there's a house standing empty. Tired of working alongside you every day and pretending we're just colleagues instead of—" He stopped. "Instead of what?" "Instead of 2 people who built something worth saving." He crossed the room to stand in front of her. "I love you, Evelyn. I think I started loving you the day you opened that trunk and pulled out tools instead of crying about the ruins. And the lie hurt so much because I loved you, because I'd started imagining a future with you, and finding out you'd hidden something that fundamental made me question everything." Evelyn's eyes burned with tears. "I love you too. I was just too afraid to admit it, too afraid that if you knew about the money, you'd change, or I'd change, or everything we built would crumble." It did crumble. We're standing in the rubble right now. He reached out and took her hand. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we needed to tear it down to build something stronger. What do we build? A life. A real one. With honest foundations this time. He pulled her closer. "We use the money for things that matter. The clinic, helping neighbors, building a future. We work together. We fight when we disagree. We tell the truth even when it's hard. And we stop measuring our worth by what we can provide individually and start measuring it by what we create together." That sounds terrifying. It is terrifying. He smiled slightly. But so was stepping off that stagecoach into ruins. You did it anyway. Because I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You could have left, could have gone back to Philadelphia or anywhere else. You chose to stay and build. That's the woman I fell in love with. Not the one with money in her trunk, but the one who stayed when things got hard. Evelyn stood on her toes and kissed him, tasting salt and promise and the bittersweet flavor of second chances. He kissed her back, his scarred hands gentle on her face, and for the first time in months, something in her chest eased. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. We're going to mess this up sometimes. Fight, make mistakes, hurt each other without meaning to. I know. But we do it together this time. No more hiding. No more protecting ourselves at each other's expense. No more hiding, Evelyn agreed. Even when we're scared. Especially when we're scared. They spent the rest of the day making the house into a home. Caleb brought his few belongings from town while Evelyn unpacked the things she'd been storing in the barn. They hung curtains together, arguing good-naturedly about whether the bedroom window needed one panel or two. They built a fire in the fireplace and cooked a real meal, the first they'd shared in the house, and ate at the table that bore both their sweat and Caleb's careful craftsmanship. As darkness fell, they sat on the front porch they'd discussed building but hadn't yet started, drinking coffee and watching the stars emerge. The clinic opens officially next week, Evelyn said. Dr. Morrison arrives from San Antonio on Tuesday. Tom Henderson said he wants to name it after Emma, the Emma Henderson Memorial Clinic. Caleb smiled. Even though she didn't die. Says it's a memorial to what could have been lost and what was saved instead. That's beautiful. Mary said you should be on the board of trustees. Make sure it runs the way you intended. What do you think? I think you should do it, but I also think, he paused, I think we should talk about what else we want to build. Besides the clinic. Evelyn looked at him. What do you mean? The inheritance. It's a lot of money. We can't possibly use it all on one clinic. He set down his coffee cup. What if we built more? Not just here, but in other towns. Small communities that need doctors and can't afford them. We could create a network, clinics funded by the inheritance but run by local people. Places that save lives long after we're gone. The idea took Evelyn's breath away. That would be incredible. My aunt would have loved it. And it would take both of us. My building knowledge, your organizational skills, my understanding of what these communities need, your ability to make things happen. He took her hand. Equal partners building something that matters. Equal partners, Evelyn echoed. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the Texas plains, coyotes in the distance, wind through grass, the creak of the windmill's blades. The homestead that had been ruins when Evelyn arrived was whole again. Different than Caleb had originally built it, changed by fire and reconstruction and the joining of two broken people into something stronger than either had been alone. I need to tell you something, Caleb said eventually. About the scars. Evelyn waited, sensing this was important. You've never asked how I got them. Most people do. First chance they get. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. I was 17, working at my uncle's farm in Missouri. A barn caught fire. Lightning strike, just like what happened here. There were horses inside and I ran in to get them out. He spoke calmly, but Evelyn could hear the old fear underneath. Got 3 of them free before a beam collapsed. Pinned me. The fire. He stopped, breathing hard. Evelyn squeezed his hand. You don't have to. No, I want to. I need you to know. He took a breath. My uncle pulled me out, saved my life. But the damage was done. The scars, the damaged hand. People looked at me different after that. Some with pity, some with disgust. I learned to read those looks. Learned to make myself small so people wouldn't stare. And when I came west to claim this land, I thought maybe I could build something where the scars didn't matter, where I could prove my worth through what I created instead of how I looked. And then the cabin burned. And then it all burned. And I felt like the universe was laughing at me, like everything I built would always turn to ash because I was already burned, already marked as someone who couldn't keep things safe. His voice roughened. That's why the lie hurt so much. You had the power to prevent that, to make sure we didn't struggle, didn't risk losing everything again. And you didn't use it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. And I'm starting to understand that you were running from your own scars. They just weren't visible like mine. He turned to face her. But here's what I realized. The scars don't make us broken. They make us survivors. And maybe that's what we build together. Not something perfect, but something that survives. That stands even when the fires come. That lasts because it's built on truth instead of illusion. Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. I want that. I want to build something that lasts. Then we do it together, with both our scars showing, with honesty even when it hurts, with trust that we'll keep choosing each other even when it gets hard. He pulled her close. No more secrets? No more secrets, she promised. Everything visible, everything shared, everything ours. Ours, Evelyn agreed, and the word felt like coming home. The clinic's official opening came on a bright December morning. The whole town turned out, along with people from neighboring communities who'd heard about the new facility. Dr. Morrison stood on the front steps, young and earnest and passionate about bringing quality medical care to rural Texas. The board of trustees, Tom and Mary Henderson, Mrs. Patterson, Doc Brennan, looking healthier than he had in years, and Councilman Davies gathered beside him. And in the crowd, Evelyn stood with Caleb, their hands linked, watching something meaningful take shape from the ruins of their early mistakes. Mayor Clifton gave a speech about community and progress and the generous donation that had made it all possible. Mary Henderson spoke about Emma's recovery and the importance of having proper medical facilities. Dr. Morrison outlined his vision for the clinic's future: regular hours, preventive care, partnerships with larger hospitals for cases requiring specialized treatment. Then Evelyn was called forward. She'd prepared remarks but found herself speaking from the heart instead. When I came to Redemption, I was running from something, from people who wanted me for what I had instead of who I was. I thought I could hide what I had and finally be valued for myself. She looked at Caleb. I was wrong. Not about wanting to be valued for myself, but about thinking I could build that through hiding. Real value, real partnership. It comes from honesty, from showing all of yourself, even the scary parts, and trusting someone else to do the same. She turned back to the crowd. This clinic exists because my aunt believed money should build something meaningful. But it also exists because this community taught me what meaningful really means. It's not grand gestures or big donations. It's showing up every day, working together, helping when you're able and accepting help when you need it. It's messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it's real. Evelyn's voice strengthened. So this clinic belongs to all of us. Not to me or my inheritance, but to every person who helped build it, every family who'll be treated here, every child whose life might be saved because we chose to work together instead of separately. This is what we can create when we stop hiding and start building as partners, as equals, as a community. The applause was thunderous. Dr. Morrison cut the ribbon, and people flooded into the clinic to tour the facilities. Children ran through the examination rooms while their parents admired the modern equipment. Doc Brennan gave Dr. Morrison a tour, pointing out features and explaining his vision for how the two of them could work together. The young doctor handling most cases while Brennan supervised and taught, finally given a purpose beyond his drinking. Caleb pulled Evelyn aside as the crowd moved through. That was a hell of a speech. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what made it powerful. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. I've been thinking about what we discussed, the other clinics. And I want to do it. Want to spend the next however many years building places that save lives. But I need to know, is this really what you want? Years of construction projects and travel and hard work? Because you could do anything with that money. Live anywhere. Be anyone. I want to be your partner, Evelyn said simply. Everything else follows from that. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard. That's when partnership matters most. He kissed her right there in front of the whole town, a public declaration that they'd stopped hiding. People cheered and whistled, and Evelyn laughed against his mouth, feeling lighter than she had in years. That night, they returned to the homestead as the sun set in shades of orange and gold. The house glowed warm in the fading light, smoke rising from the chimney where they'd left a fire burning low. It looked lived in now, curtains in the windows, Evelyn's garden starting to take root near the kitchen, Caleb's tools arranged in the workshop he'd built off the barn. Inside, they'd created a life together. The table bore scars from daily use and good meals shared. The bedroom held a bed they'd built together, arguing about mattress thickness and headboard design. The kitchen smelled of bread Evelyn had baked that morning and coffee Caleb had made too strong. It wasn't perfect. The roof leaked slightly in one corner. They'd need to fix that before winter set in properly. The floor was still bare wood. They'd talked about rugs, but hadn't made the trip to purchase any. One of the cabinet doors hung crooked because Caleb had been in a hurry the day he installed it. But it was real, honest, built on truth and partnership and the hard work of two people learning to trust after breaking that trust once before. Evelyn stood at the window, looking out at the land they'd claimed as theirs. In the distance, she could see the clinic's outline against the darkening sky. Closer, the barn stood solid and weathered. Between them, the ground they'd cleared and planted and walked until it became familiar as their own heartbeats. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That we built something worth fighting for, worth the struggle and the pain and all the mistakes that got us here." "Worth the lies?" "No." She turned in his arms to face him. "The lies nearly destroyed us. But maybe we're stronger for having survived them, for having torn everything down and built it back up honestly." "You think we're done making mistakes?" "Absolutely not. We'll make 1,000 more," she smiled. "But we'll make them together, as partners, with everything visible and nothing hidden." "Nothing hidden," he agreed. "Everything ours." They stood together as darkness fell completely, watching through the window as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed Evelyn's arrival at the ruins, Caleb's despair after the fire, the slow building of trust and partnership, and something that looked remarkably like love. The same stars that would witness whatever came next, more clinics built, more lives saved, more years of working side by side and arguing and making up and building something that lasted. The house creaked around them, settling into itself the way houses do when they're actually lived in instead of just constructed. And in that moment, Evelyn understood what her aunt's will had really meant. Building something meaningful wasn't about grand gestures or perfect plans. It was about showing up every day and choosing honesty over comfort, partnership over pride, love over fear. It was about taking the broken pieces, scarred hands and hidden money and burned cabins and damaged trust, and creating something whole from them. Not despite the brokenness, but because of it. Because the scars made them who they were, and who they were was enough. Together, they were more than enough. "Come on," Caleb said, pulling her toward the kitchen. "I'm starving, and I think we've got some of that stew left from yesterday." "You think? Don't you know? I know I'm hungry, and you're the one who usually keeps track of what we've got." He grinned at her. "See? Partnership. You handle food inventory, I handle making sure the roof doesn't leak." "The roof is leaking." "I said I handle it. I didn't say I've handled it yet." He pulled her into a kiss. "We'll fix it together tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Evelyn agreed. And that was the promise they'd keep. Tomorrow and every day after, they'd face whatever needed fixing together. Equal partners, equal responsibility, equal in all the ways that mattered. The money sat in joint accounts now, managed by both of them. Plans were already underway for a second clinic in a town 40 miles south. They'd received letters from 3 other communities asking if such a project might be possible for them as well. The work would take years, decades maybe. A lifetime of building and planning and partnership. But they had a lifetime now, had chosen each other with clear eyes and honest hearts, knowing all the ways they could hurt each other and choosing trust anyway. That night, they ate leftover stew at the table Caleb had carved with both their names. They argued about whether they needed new chairs or could make do with the current ones a while longer. They made plans for the week ahead. Finish the roof repair, order supplies for the next clinic, visit the Hendersons to check on Emma's continued recovery. Ordinary things. Daily things. The small moments that made up a life built together. And when they finally went to bed, the house dark and quiet around them, Evelyn lay awake for a moment listening to Caleb's breathing slow into sleep. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the inheritance that had seemed like a burden, the lies she'd told to escape it, the man who'd seen through the lies to the truth underneath. She thought about burnt cabins and rebuilt houses and the truth that you couldn't lie with a wall. It either stood or it didn't. Their walls stood, built on honesty this time, built to last. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Evelyn closed her eyes and slept, dreamless and deep, in the house they'd built together, from ruins and secrets and the brave choice to stop hiding and start living as their truest, most flawed, most honest selves. Outside, the Texas wind sang through the grass and rattled the windmill's blades. The clinic stood solid in town, ready to save lives. The homestead sprawled quiet under the stars, and two scarred hearts beat in sync, building their future one honest moment at a time.